All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. I'm really excited to welcome to the channel someone I've been chatting with and sometimes even sparring with online for the last for the last 16, 17 years or so. From the great New York City band Rat R, Mr. Victor Poison-Tete. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very good.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks for coming on and having a chat with me, man. I appreciate
I haven't left my house. Okay.
it. Well, we got quite a bit to go through, my friend. As I know you know from watching some of the other videos on the channel, Rat R has been mentioned a few times in some past interviews. So I thought it'd be a nice idea to connect and I wanted to chat with you anyway, but I figured it'd be really cool to kind of discuss the history of Rat R and that band and that era and the music you guys created together, and of course what you're doing now musically and otherwise. But let's kind of start off at an obvious first question, Victor.
Okay.
Rat R. Um, Interesting band name. Where in the world did that come from?
Oh, every band I've been in is a mathematical formula. Um, it has to come out to 9 or 27 or 3 to the third power, more like a mantra or chant. And so every band I've ever been in, has that's been the name. So it's kind of like a secret thing, like a Mason handshake. If the band was called Schizoid, or if it was called XEV9 or Radar, and everybody in the band, I used to make them change their names in the band so that it would come out to the number 9. I have, I don't know what they call that, OCD or something else, but I'm kind of one of those people. I walk down the street and I go, I can't live in that house because that house number comes out to a 4 or an 8, and I don't like those numbers. I like 3s and 9s, 7s and 6s. Those are my numbers. So
Hmm.
yeah, so that's where that comes from. And Patti Smith, Art Rat. You know,
Hmm.
she had said at one point that the devil was the first person that wanted to create beyond the landscape. That he wasn't happy, and that biblically they would say that everything that has been created was created perfectly. So it's blasphemous to want to change it. And so then a lot of people theoretically say that, when you're trying to change what is natural, you're changing it in your own image, and that's kind of blasphemous. So
Hmm.
that's kind of where that comes from. And so we stole that from Patty, Art Rat. You know?
Rat R obviously was very active in New York City, but from my understanding, the band's story really begins in Philly. Is that right?
It begins before that. It begins in central Pennsylvania. Um, there was like a whole, it's like I started playing out when I was like 15, and I got to pretty much know a lot of the people in that area. And there's a lot of people that come from there, like the guys in Poison are from Mechanicsburg. There's another band called Live. They were from York. Uh, so there was, it was an interesting thing. But by the time we were 15 or 16, we kind of all smelled each other out. We knew who where it was. The other person, the Fuzz Tones and Tina Peel and all those people, they all come from there. And then, of course, Glenn came from there,
Right.
Branca, you
Mhm.
know. But I didn't know him then. Because when I was old enough, I think he was in Boston going to school. No. But yeah, and that's where we started out. And then we basically were doing a lot of DIY. You had to rent a fire hall or something like that in order to do a show. So, but then when we went to Philly, in '78 and played at the Hot Club and the Artemis, and we actually had an audience, and they liked what we were doing, and that shocked us. And so we said, let's get out of Harrisburg, let's go to Philadelphia, because we have an audience that, that wasn't, just it's like your girlfriends. They come to your shows, and they gotta like you. They're your girlfriend, right? So you want to get to the point where someone other than your girlfriend tells you you guys are good. I say that there are certain things like you have to get beyond the point of where you're the girlfriend band, where the band gets together and there's always somebody's girlfriend that like throws up on somebody's shoe or drinks too much of the booze, and then that's the end of the band. So you have to get beyond the girlfriend part of the band, where your
Now,
girlfriends rule the roost.
now the early days of Rat at Rat R, that was yourself, Sonda, and Ron Anderson, right? That was kind of the nucleus in the beginning.
Uh yeah. Sonda used to manage us. She used to be the manager. She managed myself, Dave Ratt, and John Myers, and we had a bass player in Harrisburg named Jim Gordon, and she was the manager. And we went to Philadelphia, and Jim did not want to go. And so in like '78, we moved to Philadelphia, and we kind of had a good relationship with David Carroll at the Hot Club, and a DJ musician named Bobby Startup, who used to book there all the time. And they were really supportive. The first time we played in '78 with Lydia Lunch, and that was Teenage Jesus and the Jerks. That was like our first time out of Harrisburg, and that was, and David Carroll, who booked the club, he owned the club. He liked us, and he after we played, he came in the dressing room and said, "Don't do an encore. We'll just bring you back next week." And that was how that all started. So then we said, why are we playing in Harrisburg where we have to rent the hall, print the tickets and do all that stuff, and 10 people show up, you know? And we usually spent more on printing the tickets made. It's like you lay out a lot of money. That's the real backstory on Rat is whatever we made, we spent 4 times as much.
I didn't realize you were playing as early as '78 as
Because
Rat.
we were a different name, and that's what pisses me off, because it's kind of like they were the same people, but we don't get like the cred for that.
Well, what were you called back then?
XCV9,
Okay.
that's what I'm saying. And before that, but everything came out to a certain number. So I defy the odds. I say we've been the same name all along. People like to go, oh, well, they didn't come around till like 1982 or 1981. But the first Rat was 1980 in Philly with Ron on guitar and many other things. And we had a drummer named Andy Pollock, who was brilliant. And the big deal there was we had a loft in northern Philly, Northern Liberty on 3rd Street. And it was like huge loft. And so we would rehearse on Saturdays and Sundays. And Saturday nights became like this big gathering thing because everybody in Philly knew that we would be there. So we'd go from noon until 6, and then noon until 6 on Sunday. And we had some people coming in from Delaware and stuff. And so they would just spend the night. So Saturday nights became like a kind of gathering thing where a lot of people would come and just hang out at the loft because they knew we were there all the time. And that's how we got to be friends with Steve Fritz from a magazine called Terminal, and people like Ruin bunny drums. We had a couple of times we had people from George Thorogood and the Destroyers, and those people that kind of bop in and bop out,
Yeah.
because that was a big thing. And a gentleman by the name of Michael Gross who played synthesizers and keyboards, and then he had a wall of a rack of stuff that everything could be treated, like run, like at that time I was playing violin and saxophone, and it was just crazy in that we had so much stuff. It's like there would be like Ron used to set his guitar on a stand and he'd only use it like for make one sound in the whole set. So when we finally did a gig, we did a gig in an art gallery, and it took us 3 trucks. And Saturday mornings before we rehearsed, the drummer and Andy would come and we would go out into the dumps and would look for pieces of metal and that would have good, because the test department at that time was like a big deal. They would come into town and just go around, look in the dumps, and that's where they would get their equipment. So we were looking, and Andy he was playing in a punk band, like a just 4/4 punk band, really straightforward. But he was one of those Bill Buford guys, where he had gongs and he had Chinese temple blocks. And then at that time, I was making a lot of instruments. And so I just put up flyers all over Philly saying that I'm looking for experimental musicians. And that's what Ron answered it. And it turned out that Ron was only living like two blocks from me. And then Andy and Michael Gross. And then at that time, Sonda switched from being a manager over to playing bass. And to be honest with you, what we did, we structured the music in such a way that the first song we learned only had one part in it. And so my philosophy was like, you can get people interested if they're succeeding, if they're succeeding. If they're playing along and they're making mistakes, they get frustrated and they want to give out. So we would start, the first song we learned was Assassin off the first album. And that's just, bo 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 bo. Then we'd ace that and everybody would be like, okay, now we're going to learn a song with 2 parts. Then we'd do that and then we'd learn a song with 3 parts, and it just kept going from there. But yeah, every weekend we would all get together and, it would just be like the whole entire weekend, because then we'd leave Sunday night and get back together the following time. But then after a while, they put out a magazine in Philly, and then I knew it was time to leave, because they had this thing of like, in Philly, it was great because everybody would go to the club and they'd pay $15 to get in to see someone like Lydia. And they'd stand in the back of the club after paying $15 and go, well, I don't like this. No, this is horrible. And I go, well, if you don't like it, don't pay $15 and come, because otherwise you're sending the wrong message. But that's what they used to do in Philly. And then they finally decided to put out their own art magazine. And the first edition of it, the editorial was, some people stay in Philadelphia and make art and music in Philadelphia, not because they're not good enough to make it in New York, but because they actually want to. And I'm like, you lost me. In the first sentence, you lost me. You're already apologizing. You're making an excuse as to why. And that was a sad thing, because there were really good bands in Philly. Bunny Drums was an excellent band. Stickmen were an excellent band. And I can go on with really good acts in Philadelphia at that time. But they just never seemed to like get any traction. And I think part of it was their own self-image of like, we're not New York, we're Philadelphia. Boston had the same problem, I think, anyway. And then someone said because Boston was Quakers and no, Philly was Quakers and Boston was the Puritans. So you already had a disadvantage, as where if you went to New York, the Dutch were running it, and they're like, yeah, if you got a game, bring it and we'll play, you know? So at that point, we were like, okay, let's go to New York, you know, let's get the hell out of Philadelphia. And Ron then eventually followed us up. And then John and Dave, and then we just started doing shit in New York. And apparently we got there at the right time, you know. It's kind of like all of a sudden we looked around and all of our people were the Swans and Sonic Youth. Who else was when we first got there? And then a little bit later, Live Skull. And there was the Bag People. And of course, at that time, all the No New York stuff was really kind of flying, you know.
Right.
James Chance and Lydia, of course. Bush Tetras, you know, after the contortions kind of shattered. And we kind of hooked up, we met them through David Carroll, because one time they showed up in Philadelphia in their suitcase of, you know, shakers and tambourines and clickers and all that stuff that Cynthia Slay used to play in their sets. Somehow they lost it. And so David Carroll called us up and said, you know, Bush Tetras are here. Do you guys have any like tambourines or, you know, maracas or any of that kind of stuff that you could bring over? And we're like, yeah. And so that's how we got to kind of know the Tetras anyway at that time. And then when we moved to New York, got to know them a little bit better. Deep Hop and David Rat were pretty good friends, you know.
New York at that time, I wasn't around in those days. I was 4. But in any event, from what I've been told by many people who were there, New York was a rough spot in those days. It's not the chic happening spot it is now, of course. Um, how much would you say the environment you were living in at that time informed the music that Rat R was making in those days?
You know, I know that people like to like sort of romanticize it, but I don't know. It's like we were doing, you know, some of that stuff was written years before we ever got to New York.
Hmm.
So that was in us, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter if we were living in a nice house with a pool and a jacuzzi and all that crap. That's what we were interested in writing, you know. And I guess one of the biggest problems with the band was that our priority was to entertain ourselves, you know. It was like everything was like, yeah, I like this, you know. And then I guess in a way I was blessed because John Sonda, Ron Anderson, David Rat, the more you tried to get them to change, the more they knuckled under, you know. Like when we were talking with Marty Thau, he wanted to sign us, but he wanted us to change the name of the band. And his idea was the R, A-R-E. And he told us that the people at the record label that he was repping at the time, that that's what they wanted. They wanted us to be the R. And the first thing out of John's mouth was, nothing you can put the in front of. We refused. if you, so I was very happy because, you know, I don't know what I would have done if they would have said, yeah, let's change it. Let's sign that contract and change the name of the band to the R. You know, the more we were told to get rid of the name, the more it was like, fuck you, you know, this is our name now. Yeah. So I was blessed in that regard. And that was, we always tried to run everything like a committee, like, you know, do you want to do this or do you not want to do this? Because everybody had to kind of play, you know, everybody had to deal with it. And you didn't want someone in the band that would be, you know, embarrassed to be under that heading or whatever. And the same with music, you know, the better song you could write, the more everybody in the band was eager to get to the show. and like go, okay, here's our new music, you know. And so it was really a committee. You know, we'd like go, okay, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. What do you want to do?
Mm.
You know, and so it was always consensus. I was always happy that I didn't have to like uh, override or veto, or say, hey, this is, I want to do this. I liked the way Dave played. I liked the way John played. I liked the way Sonda played. And so I, you know, I wanted them to be happy. I wanted them to be like, oh, I can't wait to get to Seabees this Friday, because we're playing a new song and no one's heard it yet. And so that worked for a real long time. But then we just kept, like I said, spending 300 and making 100. And I've been thrown out of so many apartments and I've lost so much stuff, you know, from that, like leaving at 3 o'clock in the morning, behind 5 and 6 months in the rent, you know.
Yeah.
I worked freelance at the time. I worked for Condé Nast and Hatchettville Apache and Hearst Magazine. I worked for Rolling Stone for a while, all freelance though.
Mhm.
Like they paid me mad money, but if I showed up at work, they could actually let me go without any excuse. They could just say, we don't like the shirt you're wearing today. Leave and don't come back. You know. So on one hand, it was great because the money was great, but you did 2 weeks of 14, 15, 16-hour days. To make sure the magazine went out at
Right.
the right time. It got to the printer at the right time. I worked for a long time for New York Magazine. That was a lot of fun. But we did a third of the book on Tuesday, a third of the book on Wednesday, and a third of the book on Thursday. And sometimes we were there till 5 o'clock in the morning waiting for type to come in from Jersey that we could fix. And then sometimes my specialty was being able to cut between the descenders and the ascenders, and at the last minute actually correct the typographical errors myself by cutting these little tiny squares of paper and moving them around, you know. And I took a lot of pride in that I could cut through without cutting through the actual board.
Yeah.
Just cut the type itself. Anyway, I digress. What was the question?
Well, let me take a long walk to the next question, actually.
Okay.
You mentioned, you all in Rat are were creating music for yourselves first and foremost. Um, One thing I've always loved about the band is, uh, frankly, the level of talent in the group. I mean, all of you, individually and collectively, brought so much to that music. David Rat, rest in peace, extraordinary drummer. Sonda was great, John, yourself. And when I take that level of talent, I look at the song titles, Rape, Asshole, etc., and the music you were creating, it was obvious the band's goal wasn't necessarily mass.
Commerciality.
Yeah. Now, the funny thing about the New York scene is if you fast forward 10 years, the Unsane's on a major label. Sonic Youth obviously got a major label in the late 80s, but they were kind of softening by the mid 80s, let's be honest. I loved them, I love Bob, but by Bad Moon Rising, it was kind of clear where they were going to go. Rad R kind of maintained the same attitude and sound the entire time. So with that said, how did you all define success? Because clearly it wasn't going to be on MTV.
Well, again, living in Philadelphia before we went to New York, um, I had a friend from high school who went to Drexel on a scholarship, and she ended up being like a math whiz, and she ended up being Prince's tour manager in the early 80s. And she somehow ended up being close friends with Mark Goodman, who at that time was a DJ on MMR. Mm-hmm. And that she also got to know Todd Rundgren, and she dated Eddie Money for a while. And I think she dated Prince for a short while. And so I kind of knew, you know, and we would have these arguments. Mark Goodman is like, you know, he later became the MTV VJ.
Right.
But he would come by, like we had this big house in West Philadelphia, and my friend Carly would bring him by, and he would come in the house and go, "You're not listening to MMR." And would go like, "No, we don't listen to MMR." And he would go, "Well, what are you listening to?" And would go, you know, we'd play him Magazine, you know, shot from both sides. We'd play him Entertainment by Gang of Four. We would play him The Cramps, and we played him PIL. And he would go, "Oh, this is horrible," you know. But he was a nice guy. At the end of the month, he used to get like credit from like Benihana of Tokyo. The sponsors would run ads on the radio show, and by the end of the month, he would have like $1,500 left over at Benihana of Tokyo. And so he would actually call up the band and go, "Hey, I want to get," because at the end of the month, they would just give him another 1,500, and what 1,500, whatever he did not use, it would just disappear. So he was a nice enough gentleman to do that with a number of the bands. And he would say, you know, "Hey, if I take you guys out and spend a couple $100, it's good." But one time we got in an argument about stuff, and he says to me, "You know, I'm tone deaf. I play what they tell me to play." And that pretty much like sums it up. But I've always admired him because that's what he said. He said, "You know, I'm a DJ.
Right.
And that requires me to play music. And the person that signs my check says, play this." So we knew very well what we were dealing with. We were just basically ornery and contrite and fuck you. That's the only way you can say it, you know. It's like, fuck you, we're punks, you know. Fuck you, we'll spit on you. But again, so yeah, we knew what we were aware of what was going on. And again, when people tried to get us to go in that direction, I mean, a prime example for me is that the industry will continue to drive you and push you. Because like if you're an A&R guy, you're not the person on that Jay Giles record. And I think that's a prime example of what I'm talking about. I used to go and see Jay Giles. I must have seen them like 20 times because they opened up for every band in the world in the early 70s. And they were like a beer guzzling, you know, blues band. And they were great. I got into a band because I was at 14, I could play Whammer Jammer on harmonica. And harmonica was the cheapest instrument. So that was how I got my foot in the door. I could go when there were older musicians and I could go, "Here, Whammer Jammer," you know, and do it. And we did a lot of John Mayall, other blues. And, you know, that was the cheapest instrument. And that's how I got started. And then from there, just kept going and going. And you know, after a while, you see these people doing, you know, like freeze frame and stuff, and you feel bad for them because that's their legacy now. Right. Not the early beer guzzling, you know, first I look at the purse and Whammer Jammer and all that stuff. No, it's you know, freeze frame, right. Which is like, you know, you got some guy like he's the guy that told him that and pushed him in that direction. His name ain't on the record, you know. It's Jay Giles' band,
right?
So they got to live with that. And that was the other thing we used to think about, that we made that record 40 years ago. But 40 years later, there are things on there that if we would have had more money and more time, we could have made them better. But it was still our voice. There wasn't people pushing us to do this or do that or wear these clothes or say these things. That's all we got was trouble. When we would go with people, they'd be like, okay, this, but you can't say that. You can't say this. And you can't do that. And you can't do this. And then they would say things like, they'd come to CB's and go, oh, you guys are really good, but let me tell you, you know, let me tell you what my daughter thinks, and I'd be like, you're here now because we are already good.
Hmm.
So leave me alone. That was basically our attitude. Get the fuck out of here. Because you came because our reputation precedes ourselves. It's like I always like, you paid $5 to get in to see us at CB's. We were going to give you, like an old Steve Martin joke. We might give you $10 worth of show by the end of the night. You might make money. We might come out, and they were nice like that. Where we really were just, the chemistry was there, and we were just chomping at the bit, and all we wanted to do was get on stage and push the limits. And John, myself, and Dave knew each other so well, and also Sonda, because when she managed us, she watched us all the time, and so she knew. And Dave and John met each other when they were like 5. So they were always jamming together from the time they first got instruments. And then when I met them, they were 17 and I was 19 going on 20. And so we pretty much had a good sense of like telepathy of like where people were going to go, and we felt that. And kind of early on when I used to play, we would do covers and songs, and you would find yourself in the middle of a set playing and going, did I lock the car keys in the car? And then you go, well, I somehow have to keep myself engaged, that I have to keep myself in the moment. And that's what that was all about. Because there were times when you knew your music so well that you were just kind of going through the motion, which brings me to like what most like the 90s to me, I call it Muppets. It was just like there were the actions of the musicians a lot of the times were divorced from what they were actually doing. It's just they'd get out on stage and just kind of jump around and, just jump around and for 45 minutes. And I'm like, I always like people like Pat Place, where when she was playing in contortions, she'd like, you watch her play and she'll like turn her foot to the left and then bring her knee in closer to her body a half inch, kind of do her shoulder, and then hit the chord, and then go through more physical motions. And there's certain musicians and artists that's what they're doing. They're almost dancing, as opposed to the guys that just get on stage and they figure the higher I can jump and the more I can bounce my head, the better, and I always found that to be disingenuous, like, oh, well, it's a rock and roll show, and yeah, I don't know, I'd rather be boring than to be sort of disingenuous, like, oh, well, we got to move around, sometimes, I remember going to see Blondie, and Deborah Harry used to sort of like, she would stand still when she would sing. And then when she'd stop singing, she would kind of do this, and I'd be like, like multitasking, you're not doing it at the same time. But after a while, I met her a couple times, and she's really a nice person. So, I take back anything negative that I say about that. But there's a lot of people like that. It's like when they do something, they're totally still, and then when they're not doing something, then they jump around. And I don't want to name anybody, but there's a lot of that, a lot of that.
Oh yeah.
And I just and I can't stand wonky playing. You know, uh, to me, there's a difference between noise or so-called noise, because John, our guitar player, will argue with you and say that everything we did was tonal. It was all tonal, you know, as opposed to just, making fucking noise. And I also hated that tuning shit, because everybody knows that that's been there since the dawn of time. That's nothing fucking new. You listen to the first Led Zeppelin record, Page uses demodal tuning on things like Byron or Stomp, you know, and the blues players, they didn't have tuning forks and they didn't have tuners from Radio Shack. They kind of went in and went, ho, 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 ho. That's what I'm singing. And then they would tune their guitar up to that. There was no place to, get things. And you have to think about it that way. And that's actually how we used to tune, is that we used to tune off Assassin, because everybody knew the E. They all knew the E. So when we went on stage, it would be like, oh, that's the E. And that's what we tune up for. So I always thought that was horse shit, the whole tuning thing. And then you have to have a different guitar for every fucking song. No, we use standard fucking tuning. And the other rule was, for me anyway, because I sang, you have an amp, you have a chord, you have a guitar. And I don't want to piss with anything else, because a couple of times when we go out and play, if there was something complicated in the song, I would be like doing guitar parts, and then I would never get my head up off of, I'd be down here all the time. Like, and I'm like, no, I want to come out. I don't want to play guitar. I don't want to play guitar for the first 2 or 3 songs, because I want to establish some kind of rapport with the audience. I want to know who's going to be yelling at me, who might throw something at me, and where, if I got tired, I could look and get some kind of, something back to give me like, oh, okay, good, let's keep going, and yeah, you learn that real fast, like you don't want to be all in here, like inside, you need to be able to somehow get out. I made that mistake one time at Limelight, where we opened up with Annie Rapite and I had to do this complicated guitar shit. And I never got my head out of my lap. I'm like, whoa, the whole the rest of the show. And that was because I decided to go out for dinner. Well, I didn't decide, someone else did. It's like, I'm hungry. Let's go get something to eat. No, I do not go get something to eat before we play. And the reason for that is because when I leave, then those guys do the set list, and that's what they came up with. And then I come back and I'm like, ah, yeah, there are things you learn over time. When we played Montreal, we had one of the songs that put in the set, and we were building and building and building and building. It was getting crazy in a frenzy, and people were screaming. And then we played Homeboy, and it was like you could hear pins drop. Yeah. So we're like, well, maybe that's not a good thing. Maybe it's not a good thing to have that song, because people liked the song, but they, we were. It took us. We never got the energy back after that. We did like 2 or 3 more songs after that, but we never got. The crowd was not as frenzied. So you learn little things like that along the way. Don't play that. Then the other thing was, the original Rat had tons and tons of stuff, but we played with Flipper at the Peppermint, and we're in the dressing room, and it's like 100 degrees, and I'm tuning the violin, and then you come out on the stage and they hit you with this air conditioner. Mm-hmm. And so the violin just kind of went completely out of tune. So then we're like, maybe that song should no longer be in the set, because because it just problematic. It was like we used to take extra drums, we take the violin. I also play sax, but I haven't had one in a while. I'm looking into getting one now. Um, Again, you know. But I, in the early Radar, before the Radar came to New York, um, we did all kinds of crazy shit with gongs and mic toy piano. Used to have a big platform and would put mics under it and then throw shit on the platform, you know, for percussion. But when you need 3 trucks to move to go to a show, it becomes quite, you know, overwhelming and not worth it. So then we were sort of like, no, let's just go the punk route, you know, a guitar, an amp, and a chord. And then that way, I think we got that from Lydia, because when we played with Lydia in Philly, it was up on the 3rd floor. And at that time, our bass player had one of those big Ampegs, with a big arm on the back, and we had to drag that up 3 flights of stairs. And then we get there, and there's Lydia, and she brought a guitar in a paper bag.
Right.
And so we're like, you know, it's like, and we were like, what are we getting for opening up? And it was like, well, a couple, maybe 100, maybe 2, we don't know. And what are you getting, Lydia? 1,500. You know, we're like, and you bring a snare drum, a bass, and a guitar, and you're done. You know, that was it. And I'm like, that's the future. that's that's the future. You know, I'm not a bodybuilder. I don't want to lug all this stuff around. That's like when even and most of the time when you played in the clubs like Pyramid or CB's or the Ritz or which is now Webster Hall, but you couldn't use big stuff. Like I had a Marshall, but I used a Peavey. I used a small Peavey because and we were still considered loud, you know, for any of the clubs. We had more than enough volume, you know. It'd be too much. You actually have like too much power, you know, or like you're on a motorcycle and you gun it and you fall off the back, you know. So even though having the better equipment, we rarely ever used it. I remember when we played with Helmet and they opened up for us and they had all those amplifiers and they had oscilloscopes on them and you know they were all matching. They looked like Blue Oyster Cult on the Blue Oyster Cult live album. You know they got all that, and then we set up after them, and it was like all this stuff Frankenstein together. You know, a small 10-inch car crate and Galen Killebrew. John used to run them in sequence, and I had the PV and just junk stuff. And John goes, "It's like we're the Flintstones, you know." It's like, you know, especially with those guys. But then again, you know, I remember being like in junior high, and there was always the kids that, like they always had whatever you know was the latest. You know, the latest thing, the most advanced. You know, the kids that they're like in 8th grade and they're playing Rickenbackers. You know, and they they won't play anything else. I'd be like, oh man, you know, I got a height guitar, you know. So that's the way we felt with them. It was like, wow, you got all this equipment.
Let's let's break down your discography. Uh,
Okay.
there are 3 main records during Radar's existence as a band. Well, I'm counting Americide, Stainless Steel, and a self-titled.
Yeah, which we refer to as Dragonfly.
Mhm. Okay.
But there's more, but at this point it probably will never. We did like 4 songs for which I think The Way was put out on a cassette compilation with Mother Headbug and I'll plug some friends, the Big Stick people,
Mhm.
False Prophets, you know, uh, but there were other songs recording at that particular point in time, and we never got around to finishing them. And by that time, I had had enough, because when Rough Trade basically went bankrupt and they decided to keep the Dragonfly record, it took us 2 years to buy back our record. And I guess if they would have run an ad or actually placed some of those records in a record store, I would have felt differently. But I think we signed on a Wednesday, they went bankrupt on a Thursday, and our records were already in shipment to San Francisco.
And that's for the third record, right? I would call it a third record. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. The one with the Dragonfly.
Right, right,
Yeah, the self-titled, the one that Dave Sardi like produced,
right,
which
right.
was amazing. That was experience of a lifetime. He was kind of the fifth Beatle for a while, you know. That was very, very beneficial to
Yeah,
us.
yeah.
You
And
know?
he's done amazing stuff under his own steam as well, of
Oh,
course.
it's mind blowing. The only sad thing about that is I personally feel that Bark Market was one of the better bands in that time period.
Sure.
And I guess, the demand for him was greater than the demand for Bark Market.
Mhm.
And so, you know how life is, and hands you whatever. And so he got married and had children, and decided to be a responsible adult and do the right thing, take care of his crap. But, he produced so much stuff. But I think we were probably one of the earlier people that he worked with, you know, and
Well,
we,
let's start there and kind of work backwards because
okay.
the Dragonfly record is 91, right? 99.
Actually recorded it in 90. It came out in
So 91 is kind of as things were starting to bubble, the Nirvana thing was right around the corner as far as that blowing up. And it just seemed like just as that was starting to kind of pick up steam, Rat R essentially called it a day at that point.
90, the end of 92. Yeah. Yeah. The end of 92 is when I just said, again, the Dragonfly went out, and I just felt that was really unfair. I almost at times have felt that they, because the deal was that they supposedly came close to bankruptcy. And I had a thing, I thought Rough Trade was great because they were distributing uh, the Fall, which is like one of my all-time favorites. Uh, you know, uh, I like some of the Smith songs, but the idea was that you heard the Smith songs. So whether you liked them a lot or not, you at least were aware of them.
Right.
I like the one I really like is the one that has that guitar part that goes, "Mm," I am a
Oh,
gay,
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was
yeah,
gonna
that's a great song. You
say,
know, that's like that Pixies, This Monkey's Gone to Heaven. You know, I think that's a brilliant pop song. You know, but I also think that the Melvins are like as poppy as you can get. I listen to them and I go, why aren't they on top 40 radio?
right,
But
right.
that shows you how warped I am. So in reality, maybe we weren't really trying to distance ourselves from that. Maybe we just didn't have a clue as to what commercialism was. Maybe that was it, you know. Because I keep going, this should be really popular, And again, I used to argue with Mark Goodman about that. He hated PIL,
Mhm.
and we went to see PIL at Tower in Philadelphia. And the band that opened up, they were called the Reds or something like that. And he was gushing about them. And he's like, but he also hated the Cramps. So, because we used to have arguments about that too. We used to go over to Cherry Hill. There was a place over there, and we saw the Cramps 100 times, I think. And he's like, "How can you stand them?" And I'm like, "Because they're great. That's why." But he liked, and again, I don't want to be nasty to someone like Hootie and the Blowfish, but that was more his, he also liked Huey Mucus and the Blues, which again, that's to me, that is like high school jazz band shit. It's like these guys that I used to live in a building, and every month, everybody in my building would like you to get out, and you'd have to step over mountains of like Art America and Art News magazines and guitar player magazines and keyboard player magazines. And, you know what I mean? And but none of these people that had all this literature coming in, they weren't doing shows. They weren't, you know what I mean? They were reading about it. Like, like one of these days they're going to read the right sentence, and it's just going to like, like, I'm like, oh. But yeah, when I was living on Suffolk Street, it was like you had to climb once a month. You had to climb over a mountain of Art America books to get the fuck out of the place. We used to like to walk to the gigs, and on the way pick up shit along the way, and then whatever we found in the street would be sort of like a catalyst for where the show would go. Yeah. Like when I did my kitchen show, I found baby dolls, and I went by a place, a printer shop, and they had a catalog of color glossy 8x10s of lamps. It was just lamps, every kind of lamp you could imagine. The old, like with the wind tunnel, the hurricane lamp, and then the regular ones, and the ones that were on sconces on the wall. And so I had a big stack of them like that. And they were so great. And so when I used them as a prop, I like that kind of stuff. I'm not like, I'm also one of those people that like, you don't rehearse a lot, because then it makes it stale. Again, going back to that being in the moment, like you have to be in the moment and thinking about what you're going to do and anticipating what the other people are going to do in your band.
Right,
And
right.
like I said, luckily for me, I had David, which supernatural at points. You just be going, how the hell do you do that? And John was the same way. But John was like not your standard punk guitarist. He basically came from, when I first met him, he was doing Segovia, Britain. He was going to Berkeley and taking classical guitar. And he was more from like Steve Howe
Mm.
and like progressive, you know, which was, he had like a lot more than he needed. It's like, I'm trying to think of that stupid, the story, Mozart and the King of Vienna, and he goes, too many notes.
Right, right.
Yeah, like too many notes, man. You
Well,
don't have to work, you don't have to work that way.
as far as John's playing it and the band's playing in particular, uh,
Uh-huh.
I'm going to wrap it around because you mentioned Pill a couple of times, and
Yeah.
my favorite Rat R record, say that fast 4 times, um, is what I wanted Pill to sound like at the time. I wish Pill sounded like my favorite record that your band did, Stainless Steel, that EP.
Oh, the
That to
LSD.
me is the best Pill record that they never did, in my
Uh,
I adore that.
well, again, those are one of those things where I am so proud of the 9-minute manifesto on the one side, the beautiful one,
Hmm.
because that, even now we go back and go, well, how did that happen? Because at that time, David was having health issues, which is why he doesn't appear on the Dragonfly record. And there were times when it was very difficult to just get him to end the song. And I think if you listen to that record, we get to the end of some of the songs and you'll hear a lot of like, because we were trying to cover, overplaying, that extra quarter note after the song's over. My brother used to have a Crown Victoria, and he would say it takes a long time to get it going, but once you do, it's really hard to stop. And that was kind of David, in a nutshell, especially in that time period where like, oh yeah, once he got cooking, it's like he wasn't about to stop, and so he would overplay a lot. But so that's great. But there's stuff on I like Land of Milk and Honey, but I'm not happy. I'm not happy with Anti-Rapite because we messed the end of that all up, And so like I said, 40 years later, I listened to that and it's cringeworthy. I go, we didn't. We're coming in off time, and and all this other stuff, but we were always running out of money. On the Dragonfly record, we spent no time on Rednecks and Ragheads, because all of a sudden we were like, shit, we got to finish this song and we're running out of money. And so we just kind of went in and just threw it all together, and I never really got comfortable. And that was actually the stuff we recorded after that. It was like we were like a well-oiled machine, and we'd go in the studio and they sent us Ed Douglas, who had worked on In Utero with Nirvana. He worked with, I guess, Big. Was it Butch Vig or?
In Utero was Albini.
Okay, so he had engineered under Albini. And then somehow he came to New York and we went to Big Fun Studios on Crosby. And he was kind of our engineer. And we'd go in and start laying down the basic tracks, and it became this game of like, we were just kind of going in, doing everything in one take, and then, and so at one point, John said to Ed, I want to do the solo over again. He says, I think I can do it better. And Ed said to him, well, everything's been one take up until this point, which became, yeah, well, it's a Rat Out R record. It's not an Ed Douglas record. He says, like if I want to make like, what is this? To have some kind of blurb, Rat Out R's new record is all first takes. I mean, but, I never, to this day, I can't listen to those 4 cuts and decide whether I like them or not. It's like one time I listened to it and I'm like, yeah, those are really cool, And then the next time I listen to it, I go, what I think upset me was by that time, everybody sounded like us, So when we sounded like that in 1982 and 83 and 84, there wasn't that much like that. But by 92, everybody sounded like that. And it kind of disturbed me. And I kind of like we had become a machine where we were going to start just going in and processing the stuff and then walking away, without ever even leaving our own personal scent on it. That's how I felt. I felt that we had gone, like we're sleepwalking, like going in and playing and sleepwalking,
Right.
and then you leave and then you listen to it and go, and again, I at that time it was like Soundgarden and Nirvana and what's the band? Mark Arm.
Oh, Mudhoney.
Mudhoney, you know, although we were never that chaotic, I don't think.
Hmm.
I don't think we were ever that, like, you know, I don't know. And then like I'm not really like fond of a lot of the '90s stuff. There are bands that I just don't like. I don't really care that much for God, what was the name of the Perry Farrell? What was his band?
Jane's Addiction, then he had Porno for Pyros.
Yeah, I didn't like either one.
Hmm.
And I don't like the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I just don't like them, you know. And but by that time, like I said, there were so many people doing that. Everybody was doing that. And I also had like a chip on my shoulder in which I felt that, you know, the big guys ignored the whole New York scene for as long as they possibly could. And then that resulted in them finding something they could latch onto and then destroy, you know, which is pretty much the Nirvana thing, you know, because I don't think Kurt viewed himself as a pop star. I think he wanted to be more like Jello Biafra, you know, and be a righteous avenger for the causes. And, you know, it's kind of nice being underground because then you don't really have anything to live up to, you know? And that was also with one of the things I wanted. That's why Homeboy is on the first record, because I wanted to make the statement of like, don't expect us to every song we put out the next 10 years is going to be like this song. We tried to put enough variation on that first record that if we wanted to put out a country swing record, we were going to do it, you know? And that's how I looked at it. I did not want to be pigeonholed. And I did not want to be like, I always felt that, like, and again, I don't want to be mess up anybody's sacred icons, but I always felt the Ramones only really needed to make one record because it was the whole package, you
Hmm.
know? It was like when you went to a Ramones show, you got 360 degrees of what that band was. And, you know, it perfect, perfect. You know, you couldn't get a better definition of what that whole scene was about than the Ramones. But would I want to do that forever? No. You know, uh, mainly because I'm more interested in multi instrumental stuff. You know, I've always played other instruments other than guitar, but I'm primarily a singer. The only reason I play an instrument is because when I was younger, I had to rely on people that only knew how to play 12 bar blues. And so no matter what you wrote lyrically, that was what you got, you know? And so I'm like, well, I'm going to break that mold. And I used to, when we would rehearse and I'd just sing, would take breaks and I would go and get the guitar and everybody would go, oh, let's go outside. Victor's playing the guitar. And so I still consider myself like the utility infielder. Like John is the guitar player, Son is the bass player, Dave's the drummer, and I'm the guy that sort of like cleans up. And that basically is because we had a guy that played violin and keyboards, and I wanted to play more keyboards than violin because I thought the sound was being locked in by the violin in every song. And I asked him to play more keyboards, and he got mad and destroyed his violin. And, you know, and so from then he eventually killed himself. And so I said, well, if we want to have a sax, I'm not getting a sax player. I'll figure out how to play the sax and I'll do it in that song and I'll only learn how to play that melody and that'll be enough. And then I did the same thing with violin and other instruments. It was much easier than, you know, than to be stuck with someone that only plays that instrument. And then, you know, I don't want a like even like things like I really love the first Psychedelic Furs record,
Oh yeah,
you
yeah.
know, which is a concept record, you know. They were doing the Velvet Underground with the saxophone. That's what they were doing. That whole record is all about Andy Warhol and this factory and and all that stuff. Great record, but they didn't follow it up with much after that. They're still touring, I think.
Oh
I
yeah.
just saw an ad for them, you know.
Yeah. It's not, it's only a couple of the original guys. The brothers are still doing it,
The
but
Butlers, yeah.
everybody
You would
else.
think like the kid, like what's his name, Davy, the Davies brothers, they would have killed each other by now.
Right, right.
But I guess that's sibling rivalry, you know. You know how to pull your punch, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
It's like you can get them close to death, but you don't actually kill them, you know. So
Well,
yeah, I don't know, but I didn't like that Pretty in Pink stuff. And, I
I
guess they got. I don't know what to say, because it's like if you want to make money, then you do that, you know. So I thank them for the first Psychedelic Furs record. I thank them from the bottom of my heart because that was an entertaining record, you know.
for the record, because I know there may be some psychedelic furs watching this channel.
Yeah.
I'm with you guys up to like the first 4 or 5 records. I'm good. You know.
What the psychedelic furs?
Yeah.
Well, let me just be clear. The views and opinions of Victor Poison-Tete are not necessarily the views of Joel Gaston. If you have a beef, you have a beef with me. The second record was okay. The second record was okay. I just didn't like the John Hughes stuff, but I don't like his movies. So I don't know what to say. But
Well,
I will say this about the Kings. After all the amazing, beautiful music they did when they went with Arista, I'm like, I hope they're making money.
yeah.
That's where I felt. I felt, man, you people have paid your dues over and over again, over and over again. You have given us such great music that yes, go make some money.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Oh,
And I just say, yeah, well, I love you, Dave, love you, Ray. You know, I hope you're whatever you call it, relaxed. Because everything is so stressful. You know, like I said, you're making $100 and you're spending three. Where does the other 200 come from? I don't know. It's like there's someone said, "Oh, Prince is making $50 million a year in 1984." And I'm like, "Yeah, and he's spending 60."
right. Right. Right.
Yeah, but
I
again, I learned a lesson there because at one point they were playing the Coliseum, and Prince had like 3 or 4 different hotels, and my friend invited us up to the one hotel. And she took us to the window and she said, "Look, there's 3 floors down. See the white piano in the room? That's Prince's room." But he had three. He had 3 rooms in 3 different hotels so that he could go from one to the other and no one ever knew what he was doing. And then he used to also come around and knock on the doors at 4 o'clock in the morning to make sure that everybody was being righteous. And weird guy. But we got their van broke down and everybody, Morris Day and everybody, they all had to get in the van. They had to get out there. So at the last minute, my friend Carly, she's got a wad of $100 bills. And she goes out in front of the hotel and she's flagging down cabs. And she's saying, "Okay, Morris and you and you and you get in this cab." And she gives the cab driver a $100 bill and says, "Take them to Nassau Coliseum." After we got everybody else on there, then we get in the cab, myself, her, and Sonda, and we go out. And she gives the guy $100. And he starts going, "It's a $34 fare." And she goes, "Keep the change." And that's pretty much what everybody in that cab was doing. And I said, "This is why you would want to be big." The guy told us his wife and his son were still in Cuba and he was raising the money to get them out. And so to me, it was like, now I can see that there are t-shirt vendors and drink vendors and cab drivers. And so when someone like Prince comes into town, it's a lot of people are benefiting from it. And that would be the only reason that I would want to be that, that big, is to have people that made t-shirts and sold snow cones, and that would be the reason.
Yeah.
But I'm not that kind of, you don't want to depend on me.
Let's get into Americide, the record that kind
Okay.
of started it all. That,
Uh-huh.
that's the first album, uh,
Yeah.
and it initially came out. Glenn Branca put that out, and I think that was what 3,000 copies originally, which sold out pretty quick.
Two.
2,000 copies. It
We
was
have yet, it's one of those big things I like to brag about. We have yet to break 10,000 units for everything.
hmm,
Everything. The first record was 2000, second record was 2000. The third record, which got absconded by Rough Trade, there were 2,000 albums, 2,000 CDs, and 1,000 cassettes. So that altogether is 9,000. And then we reissued the first record on CD
right.
through Ectro, and there were 500 copies of that. So we're only at 9,500. That's it. So there's a part of me that kind of feels like King Kong, because we sort of preceded the internet, because I always think that, it's like the way people market stuff in America is that you print so many copies of stuff that people trip over them, you know? It's like Rumors by Fleetwood Mac,
Right.
there are certain records that if you go to a flea market, you will see them over
That
and over
Herb,
again.
that Herb Albert record with the whipped cream. You see that fucking
Yeah, there you go. But he owned the record label,
yeah.
so, but that was their whole marketing strategy. It was like, well, I'll put one here and you'll trip on it. I'll put one there and you'll trip on it. And I'll put one here and eventually you'll listen, and that's how they sell things. And, so there's a part of me that's quite proud of the fact that we've maintained some legs on that minimum amount of, you know, copies, sort of.
Well, I remember when that record was reissued, when Americide was reissued, the Village,
2012.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
in 2012, the Village Voice did what they called an oral history of Rat R, even though
Yeah.
I think it was just you and John, right, who were a part of that.
And Ron, because Ron was doing shows at the Stone.
Right.
And so, yeah. Yeah. And Ron always amazed me because Ron is very talented and he's played with, recently I found out he was playing with James Chance and done a lot of stuff with a lot of things. And he would always like, be going, oh, I'm, a co-founding member of Rat and I go like, dude, you have so far surpassed me at this point, you know, it kind of like, Paul McCartney saying, I played with Tony Sheridan.
Yeah, let me stop you there though, because the
Oh,
reality is, you mentioned, there were a total of 9,500 records
yeah,
total for Rat R. But
yeah.
honestly, to this day, people who know the band really know the band and really respect the band. So I can see where
Well,
John kind of uses that as a calling card. I go, yeah, Rat R, because you talk to some cats and they dig the hell out of those records, myself included. And I
well, thank
wasn't
you very
around
much.
then. It found me.
Uh-huh.
So you guys do have a legacy. People do look back very fondly at that band.
Well,
Who's
that's a nice thing because I don't have any children and I have no life to speak of. That is my life. That is my baby. That's it. I mean, I get verklempt when I think about it. When I think about Dave or John, they yeah. So I do appreciate it, you know. because we never made it. We never made any money, you know. And I can remember being a kid. You would think anybody that got a record out, they're billionaires, you know. And you would listen to stuff by Zappa, and you'd be like, how can they be saying that stuff? You know, like there's that one thing on Uncle Meat where they're like, you know, if we would have worked 2 gigs this month, Frank, and you're like, oh, Zappa, and they must have billions, you know. Yeah, just have no clue. But I also think that's part of the hype, you know, it's like the idea that you're not going to get all these kids to carry your water if they don't feel there's like a rainbow at the end, you know, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And that's what I feel now about like YouTube and Bandcamp and Spotify and you know all that stuff. It's like they make nothing but money, and it's amazing. And in the process of that, they're skunking everybody, you know. And what's really killing me now is that these people that go on there and they go, "I'm going to give you a free CD and I'm going to autograph it," and I'm like, even if you're paying $1.10 or $2 for each one of those you make, what kind of marketing strategy is that? You know, I kind of feel bad in that uh, they're going to, you know, like I said, maybe spend $1.50, $2 for a CD and mail it to you. And if I personally feel that they're not necessarily going to be loyal to you,
Hmm.
you know, they're not. It's not the same as like, but that's also what I feel was the problem with MTV was that it made music too easy to get, and therefore it cheapened it. You know, when
Great.
and again, I hate to sound like a dinosaur, but a lot of the people I know that are my age, they would do a paper route, work a part-time job, and I can remember going with friends, and I ended up getting Amagama by Pink Floyd because I'm like, look, it's a double record, and it costs the same amount as that Red Thing by Grand Funk, you know, which we've heard a million times. I'm going to get this. Look at the equipment on the back. I'm like, 2 records, 495. Look at the equipment on the back, you know. So I was like, and then of course I fell in love with Careful with That Axe Eugene and all that stuff, you know. But that was how the economy of that, you know, was like so
Well,
awesome. It's like I've
but,
already heard Grand Funk a million times. Who are these guys, you know?
but what you're describing is the experience of discovering something as you made the effort to go somewhere and find the music.
Of
Um,
course.
here's an
Wasn't
example.
that the beauty of it?
Yeah, I just did an interview a couple weeks back with old buddy of mine, Erie Vaughn. Used to play for Danzig and Sam Hain. And
Okay.
Erie just put out a record, a CD. You can't buy it online, you can't download it. It's a physical CD that you PayPal him the money, he ships it himself, he signs it himself, like the address on the label is Erie's handwriting. He's doing it all himself. And you know what? It's so refreshing to like, I want to hear Erie's new record. I got to send him some money. In a few days, he'll send me back the record. You know, you just can't click a button and get his album. And you can't listen to it online because it's not online. It's in his place, and he just stuffs the envelopes and mails them out. It seems so simple, but it's so magical in 2024 to actually have to put some kind of effort and actually connect with the artist. It's like
Yeah.
back in the day when you're selling records out of the trunk of your car after a show, or
Well,
back in
that's
the 90s, send a money order, we'll send you our 7-inch. You know, I miss that so much. So I get
trouser press in the 70s.
what's that?
Trouser press in the 70s.
Right, right.
We used to work at a record store, and one of the guys that worked with us, his name is Adam Resnick. He eventually became the writer on David Letterman's show, and he did that crazy pirate movie with Chris Everett or whatever his name is,
Right,
Chris
right.
Elliott. Yeah, And we used to go through Trouser Press, and the first thing we came across was the very first Devo 7-inch with Boogie Boy. It was a great gatefold cover. We also got Final Solution by Perubu, and we all mailed for it. The other people we got to know was half Japanese,
Right.
the Fair Brothers, and yeah, a lot of that stuff we were like getting it through Trouser Press. But then the other thing we used to do was comb NME. Uh, would read, Cockney Rebels playing in a bar in London. And then we'd be like, okay, let's look and see if we can find a Cockney Rebel record in Swan, And then we would special order them through Gem. And, and that's something we were talking about earlier is that when we used to play in the mid 70s, every Friday, the deal was that everybody in the band would buy an album. They would buy an album. And you'd show up Friday night, it would be like, okay, what's your choice? And they'd be like, I got the first Kiss record. I got the first Queen record. I got Iggy and the Stooges. And we would play them and then go, committee wise would be like, nah, I don't want to work that hard. Or, but we did, and then we were so stupid because everybody's like, you want to do covers so you can get gigs in the clubs. So we're like, we're doing covers, and then we're like doing a Velvet Underground cover, and we're doing an Iggy cover, and we even had a guy that played ARP, and he could do saxophones, and so we used to do Roxy covers. We did the Strand, and we did If There Is Something was my favorite. We used to do that, and he would do the sax part like note for note with the ARP Odyssey, and we were so happy about that. Like did a bunch of that stuff. I think the New York Dolls, we used to do, I think that whole first record, I think at one point or another, we covered that whole record, and then we're like, well, how come we're not getting booked? Because nobody knows the shit you're playing. That's why, you dumbass. But yeah, we did Personality Crisis, Looking for a Kiss, and Chatterbox, which is one of my all-time favorite songs. I love this song. I actually like when Johnny Thunder sang better than Johansson.
Mhm.
And I look forward to meeting Johansson again when he's not drunk. Because I feel I cannot at this time. The 3 times I met him, he was like fall down drunk. And I'm like, I can't judge on that. Yeah, he was fall down drunk, and him and Peter Missing almost got in a fist fight. So
Oh,
that was a lot of fun. Do you know Peter Missing?
I know of him, sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Most people do know of.
I know his reputation. I've never met the man.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was quite a night. We were at Georgia Gomelski,
Right, right.
and it was Buster Poindexter's birthday, and he was shit faced. Boom, 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 boom. I don't know if Georgia's around anymore, but
I don't know. I haven't heard. Um, Hope so. I don't know. I know the legends of that time period with him, but I don't know if he's still around, actually.
well, I hope he is because he was a whole lot of fun. And there was a time where Branca used to rehearse there, and we used to rehearse in the basement. And a couple bands were rehearsing out of there. You know? And I guess we had got through that with Branca.
Mhm.
And Glenn, when we finished that record, we were dealing with Marty Thau, and he was looking to sign us. Um, and Glenn, from like day one, was like, "I'll put it out," and we were kind of like, we had a thing because Sonda was his cousin, and so that was kind of a weird thing because we didn't want anyone to think that. But believe me, Glenn would not have, just done it because Sonda was his cousin. That was not Glenn. Glenn would have said, I don't give a shit who you are. You can be my mother. I'm not putting your record out. So that was nice. So he, like, from day one was like, well, I'll put it out on neutral. We're like, okay. And then, we're like, we'll see, And then he'd call like a month later and I'd be like, well, can I have my own special label? Like, can I make the label? And he'd be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I'd be like, call back a month later. I'd be like, can we have an insert with the lyrics? And then the best thing about it was the way I wanted to cover, they stopped making halftones at that point. And so, best story for me was my best friend from junior high and high school worked in a print shop in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And they were the last people that were doing wraparound covers, because the first record is a wraparound cover, one of the last one, where they printed it as a big sheet and then wrapped it around. And at that time, I think they were printing directly on cardboard, and it limited the definition, of the halftones. And so to get it to look like that, you had to go to a certain process. And so that was great because my friend from high school, unbeknownst to me at the time, actually was the one that worked on putting the negatives together and assembling that record for printing.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
and that's kind of like one of those things, where uh, I could touch my friends, you know. Okay.
Get it, man. I get it. Of course, I wanted to talk about what you've been doing in the here and now and in recent years. And I do know you've been doing some work with somebody I used to talk to quite a bit back in the MySpace days, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. Max
Yes.
Brody from Ministry. I know you
Yes.
and Max have been doing some stuff. So tell me about that and what's been going on with the two of you, what you guys have been up to.
Well, he's in Seattle and he's got this new band. They're called Schmedley's Racket, and they just added a keyboard player. But for some reason in 2006, when MySpace blew up, he put up an instrumental and said, you know, anybody can chime in. And so I really liked it and I sent him lyrics, and then we started talking on the phone. And at that time, he used to fix cell towers. So he had a Grumman box fan, and they gave him per diem money and they gave him all this other stuff. And he chose to pocket the money and sleep in his van. And, you know, he would record. So he kind of had made this little box van recording thing. So he had to go to New York. So on his way to New York, he came through Pittsburgh and he stayed with me for like a week. And then I got in a van with him and we went to New York. And then we hooked up with Stu Spasm from Lubricated Goat.
Right.
And he had been trying to meet him for like, I don't know, like 6, 7, 8 years. He kept telling me, oh, one of my favorite bands is Lubricated Goat. And turns out we had done shows with them. So I kind of knew Stu, not well, but, I think we did a couple CB benefits with them. And then I think we played Philadelphia with them one time. But, again, I'm always like, when we go to a gig, I don't really have a lot of idea about what's going on around me. I'm kind of like, like if I'm playing Friday night on Monday, I'm already like, I've already got the clock set, you know. And I used to always tell people, like, if we were headlining at CB's, if I tell you we're going on at midnight, we're going on 10 minutes before midnight or 10 minutes after midnight, but I will throw you off the stage because your whole for the whole week your body's going, okay, midnight of Friday, midnight of Friday, midnight of Friday. And if you find yourself missing that, you actually get angry and you crash. And so part of the prerequisite was, okay, you can open up, but be aware that we're going to be on at midnight. And because otherwise my whole chemistry would just be thrown off. And because you get mad. I mean, there's a story where Ray Davies jumped into the pit, the organ pit with the guy from Yes, Rick Wakeman, because they were running long. He just hurled up over the organs and the keyboards and beat the crap out of him, telling him like, you people are running, you're like a half hour over time, You can have that. And that was part of like, the rider was, we're getting on at midnight because my whole body clock was that way,
Right.
I could do 10, 15, 20 minutes, but then beyond that, so they were like, you got to get off because then we got to get on. And I don't want it to be like a half hour, 45 minutes, because that time I'm so angry and frustrated that I just lose all that energy. And then it would be like, okay, let's play, Yeah. We always looked at it like as an athletic event, and we would pace the songs that way of like, you got, the game, whether it's hockey, 3 periods or 4 quarters or, 9 innings, we looked at it that way and then arranged everything. So there were build-ups and then, let out some steam and then another build-up, So, yeah. And I always wanted to be on, I wanted to be on. I didn't want to be too high. Well, I never, other than smoking marijuana, I never fucked around until the band was done. When the band broke up, then I decided to like give the attention to other destructive shit that, I gave to music, It's like, I'm not going to be doing music anymore. So I'll take all that and dump it in over here, and became a professional degenerate as opposed to an amateur. What was the question?
Well, you, Max and Stu.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that was amazing too, because I somehow befriended what's his name, Ian Wilson from Star Spangles,
Right, right. Okay. Great
and
band.
he was good friends with Stu, and the guy that ran Monkey Space, I can't remember his name. So Max said, I've been trying to meet this guy, I would love to get a sample of his guitar, and pretty much like he thought if he could get like one lick that he would go back and transfer it. But as it turned out, Ian gave us his phone number. We called him up and he said, come on over. And so me and Max went over, and he just ended up giving Max like 10 or 12 different songs. He's interesting gentleman. He sat on the edge of the bed and he was watching like alligators eating snakes and snakes eating alligators and things that could swallow stuff bigger than their head and things like that. And the whole time he's like going, here's a song, blah, blah, and he'd rip off a riff, and then he'd go, and here's the bass part, and never taking his eyes off the television. And then Max would say, got anything else? And he'd go, yeah, here's another part, and he would lay down that. So there's a whole album of Max, myself, and Stu called The Encounter. And we did it all in his living room. And then Max took it all back and Frankensteined it all together with sax and stuff like that.
Did
And I
that
think
come
there
out?
are other, huh?
That come out? Has that been released?
Uh, Max has it on maxbrodyworld.com. And I think that through Bandcamp, you can buy cuts of it or you can buy the whole thing. And, I really don't know that much about that. And the other people that are on there are, what's his name? The bass player from the Buttholes. I can't think of his name now.
There have been a couple.
The
Uh,
guy that was in the Melvins as well.
oh, Jeff Pincus.
Pincus, yes.
Yeah.
So he's on a cut, and some people from Scratch Acid are on there.
Great.
kind of cool in a way, you know. I mean, I kind of through Max have like links to those people, and those people were an awesome little group. I feel more at home with them than I do a lot of the other New York bands,
Mm.
to be honest with you, you know, because they're a little, they don't take themselves quite as seriously, you know. And someone said that not sound wise, but I guess uh, whatever you want to call it, that we Radar was a lot like Butthole Surf
Mm.
in that we are sort of unique, you know, that there's not like a whole thing. There's the Butthole Surf, you know, and then there's Radar, but they're not like you know, like this whole bank, you know, of like grunge, you know. It's like they're like standalone complex, you know, that Ghost in the Shell thing. That's why I like to look at it. I like to call it the standalone complex. You know, it stands on its own. You know,
Well,
like Joni Mitchell, huh?
that's what's funny about when people um sometimes lazily will talk about the New York noise scene at Sonic Youth and Swans at Radar. I can't think of three different sounding bands than those three bands. You know, like everybody had their own thing happening.
Yeah, but you know, the Safety in Numbers, which was the club we all started playing in, and and again, it's kind of like it's really easy if Sonic Youth comes to you, it's really easy to sort of blow them off. You just kind of go, ah, you know, and the Swans are the same way, and we're the same. But the three of us, and then you mix in Live Skull
Mm.
and some other stuff. It becomes, you know, and I guess to a certain extent, having it Swan, Sonic Youth, and Radar kind of opened the door a little more
Mm.
so that each of us could get a foot in, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so even though, yeah, there was, believe me, there's not a whole lot in common between those three bands, you know? And also, that's also the thing that used to make me angry was that the Swans never had a consistent lineup. They they were always switching people. And Sonic Youth were really novices. You know, Kim wasn't like a skilled bass player at that time. She was pretty much groping her way through it, you know, figuring it out as they went along. And they had that natural ability, like especially on the first EP, you know, Burning Spear and
Oh
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
They just like fell in it. You know, it's like they just had a natural knack of things that were kind of catchy. And I didn't like Confusion of Sex as much as I did the first EP. And when that record came up, we came up and got copies of Glenn's Lesson Number One,
Mhm.
and Glenn threw us a box of the first Sonic Youth EP. And then we went back to Philly and sort of took it around, you know, take it to Third Street Jazz and some of the other stores. And I remember playing both Glenn's Lesson Number One and the EP for people and saying, "This is the next shit, man. Listen to this." And I really think that um, Edson had a lot to do with that.
Right,
You
right.
know, yeah, Richard Edson. Which again, if you want to be in a movie or you want to be in, you know, a rock band that, you know, I don't know. I think you made a lot more money and probably had a lot more fun doing movies with Oliver Stone and Jim
Right.
Jarmusch, and you know, uh, who else do you work with? He's an 8 Men Out, and I'm trying to think of that guy's name because he's a good filmmaker. John,
John Sayles. John Sayles.
yes, amazing filmmaker. He did Mattawan. Um, yeah, but
I love
I
that Edson lineup of Sonic Youth. I love the first EP. Confusion is next. I can listen to, but it doesn't grab me a lot. It kind of sounds like scattered puzzle pieces to me. It doesn't sound cohesive. Bad Moon Rising is my favorite Sonic Youth record. which is
Yeah,
probably
that's what everybody says, and I have yet to listen to that. And I always used to joke and say that every time I went to get a new Sonic Youth record, the last one I bought was Evil, and
mm,
before that I bought Sisters.
mhm.
And I keep saying to myself, well, it's not that one. So I have to break down and get a copy of Bad Moon Rising.
Yeah.
Confusion is Sex, we were playing a lot with them. So they actually gave me a copy of that, but that's long gone, you know. But you know, I don't know, I listen to nobody does I Want to Be Your Dog well. And, you know, they just don't. They just don't. And I think part of that is because the drummer, I don't remember his name now, but he splits that time signature in two, and no one else does.
In the
It's
Stooges?
like he goes, huh?
In the Stooges?
Yeah, yeah.
Scott Ashton,
Okay.
drummer for the
He
Stooges.
goes, he goes, ba-doom, ba-doom-ba, pa-pa, 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 ba-doom, ba-doom-ba, pa-pa, 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 ba-doom, ba-doom-ba. And that's what makes that thing move. I find that one of the problems with the 90s was that they lost the syncopation in the music.
Hmm.
When you listen to stuff like Junior Walker and the All Stars or some of the older rhythm and blues stuff, they get this kind of, hip grind going where it's not all in, the head bobbing up and down. It's like they got the head bobbing, but they also got some hips and some knees and some shoulders going.
Right.
And to me, that's where the magic is. And I feel that when we went into the 90s, it became all this head banging shit, all up and down, all up and down, all up and down, all up and down. And it just bores me after a while. And then I like to call it the Muppets. It's the Muppet stage show. It's like everyone just kind of flops around, and they do that for 45 minutes and everybody goes, yeah, that was exciting. And I like things to get a little dirty. I like when things get a little hippie. you know, that's more. And especially now because I'm older and I'm working on material and I can't do that. I can't do the Muppet. I'll be dead in 5 minutes. So I'm gonna have to slow it down and do a little more of that, kind of like thing. Pull out a little Brian Ferry so I can catch my breath.
So
Yeah,
what
so
are you
yeah,
working
I'm working.
on now?
Huh?
What are you working on now?
Well, I got my Tascam, and little by little, for the past, uh, say, 15 years, everything has always been like you come up with a lick, and if you can remember it the next day, it's a better lick. And if you can remember it 6 months later, it's a better lick. So now I'm kind of playing around with things that I have had in my head for 15 years, 2 years, but it's all stuff that is like time tested, bass parts, guitar parts, vocal parts. And because I think for the longest time, I kind of lost my voice. I mean, like, and I mean, not my voice, but the person inside me that felt compelled to make the music to begin with, because I felt that it's just like you do it and people say, oh, it's wonderful. But I guess the thing that broke me was the Rough Trade thing. I just felt that I know our label, Mike Pettis, who was the one that ran Purge and Sound League. He laid out a lot of money for that record. And then they just took it. And then we ended up negotiating with them for 2 years. And Mike had to pay $1.11 per copy of the record that he himself, they didn't, that's what I don't understand. And to me, it just was like, oh, well, that's business. No, that's not business. That's bullshit. And again, everybody said, oh, don't worry about it because this has happened to Rough Trade 3 or 4 times before that. And at the last minute, people come in and bail them out.
Mhm.
And I know that also the Butthole Surfers were kind of caught up in that, and a bunch of other bands were also caught up in that. They lost product, and they lost time, and they lost effort. And now I kind of have this cringe where Rough Trade is back up in business, but we're not.
Mhm.
And so there's a part of me that just resents it. Like you can run up all these bills and then declare bankruptcy, and then no, you're that, I mean, how can I go back to Mike and go, hey, come on, you just laid out 30,000, $35,000 to get this record out. Let's do it again. And then when we finally got the record back, we made the mistake of sending out copies to reviewers and then put the other remaining in the mail. And then they took it and locked it in a warehouse in San Francisco. And then we ended up paying their debts by buying our own record back. And and again, come on, you're an independent record label. You know, why didn't they do this shit to Geffen?
Right.
He's got all the money in the world. They didn't do that to him. And so it just kind of bittered me on the whole business of like, you could just do that. You could just do that, you know? Like the ink hadn't even dried in the contract. It's like I figure if they ran an ad or actually sent 10 copies to a record store, someone, but they hadn't done that. They were waiting on our shit coming to them in the mail.
Mhm.
And, you know, so I just felt that like, oh, if I talk someone into like putting out a record by me, I might as well just tell them to burn their money. That's how I felt. Hey, got $30,000 you want to waste? You know? So, uh, it, and then you get that whole thing of like, wow, you're not on MTV. And I go, I wouldn't be on MTV anyway.
Mhm.
I don't want to be on. I feel that the whole beauty of music was that you did have to go and find it. You had to search it out, like the kids would be playing Lenny Bruce in their bedroom and hoping their parents don't hear, because Lenny's going to say a dirty word any minute. And that's kind of the way it was. It's like when we were kids, we'd wait all week for Sunday night, maybe see 3 minutes of the Doors or 3 minutes of the Stones, you know? It wasn't like you turned it on and it was there 24/7. You had to go out. And I get mad even now. It's like I've long been a Kate Bush fan. And there's a part of me that always goes, like now she's big. you know, it's like it's like that's like I love the first two Springsteen albums, but the third one, when I had people that come up to me in the hallway of school and go, "Have you heard Born to Run yet?" And I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I've been listening to this guy for 5 years now. Where have you been?"
Right.
You know, and I'm like, it just creeps me out. I'm like, and I guess I'm an elitist.
Well, look, you talked about MTV and how,
Uh,
on MTV. Here's the truth. I've talked to enough people who have been on MTV and we're on MTV. I'll
uh,
give you one example, no names mentioned, but there is an artist I'm familiar with, friendly with, who had a gold record, was at the Video Music Awards, the whole thing. If I mentioned this person's name, you would know them.
huh.
Almost 30 years later, this person still owes the label like 95 grand because it never recouped. Because, this person would get like a limo to some like talk show. Okay, well, that's
That will go on the tab.
right. So they don't expect to ever make enough to recoup whatever they were, whatever the label spent generously for them and then charge back to them, and this is somebody who had hits, was doing
Oh
the whole,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So, it's not like you make money either way. You know, so you might as well hold on to your fucking integrity because you're not going to make any money going the other way either, you know.
Well, like the first record with Glenn said, the music is yours, the product is mine. So it's like the way it was packaged with the slip sheet and all that stuff and the cover and all that, that's Glenn.
Mhm.
Uh, but Glenn said, I don't, that's your music.
Mhm.
So, and the same with Mike Pettis on Sound League.
Mhm.
The music is ours, the product is his. And someone said to me at one time, oh, you should just, fuck Mike, just have someone, take your masters and go to another label and redo it. Change the record cover. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. It just doesn't make, you know. But then again, we were told with Marty Thau, they're like, sign the contract and then sue him. And I'm like, well, and literally they said, you're in the business. Like, I'm in court with Marty Thau and Buddha Roulette Records, so I'm in the business.
Mhm.
And I'm like, well, that's not the part of the business I want to be in. I'd much prefer to just do it. And that's why now what I have is what I like to call rinky dink. That might be the name of the record. I'm making it on a shitty uh, Tascam home recorder. And this is the thing that blows me away. I also have a digital interface, and they're telling me that 6 million of these digital interfaces have been sold in the United States. There's like 30 different companies that make these digital interfaces because, everybody wants their own podcast. So they've made like remember when in the 60s when they had slot cars, and they were huge, and then they made the little HO tracks. And that's what I feel I've got going on here is I've got like a rinky dink little HO track that's gonna put out some music and sound like this, all mid range. But it's gonna cost me nothing to make. And the way I look at it is I'm just gonna put it online. I'm just gonna send it to people
Mhm.
through the email because it's my gift, you know. So someone said, oh, you're gonna go to a label and have a label. Why? And then I'm going to have like, they're going to spend money on it, they're going to press it, and they're going to put it out, and then someone's going to say, I'm not distributing it. And then someone's going to go bankrupt. And then it's going to be, so it's like, no, I'm making the music at this point in my life. I've got a roof over my head. I eat well. And what do I need? I don't go to, I'm going to volunteer because I love books. So there's a charity across the street, and I'm like, I'm going to volunteer to when they get the books, put them out on the shelf and stuff like that. Mainly because I'm selfish and I want to get first crack at, you know. I just picked up a first edition of what is it? Harper Lee. What is that?
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah, yeah. I just got a first edition of that over there.
Oh.
So, and it was a whole 50 cents. So, but yeah, I'm gonna go over there because I like it. I always worked in a bookstore or a comic store, hung out at the Strand for hours. I worked in planned. I love that stuff, you know. So I'm going to go over there and volunteer. But I don't, if someone says to me, I'll put your record out and I'll help you, uh, I'm making demos. But, if someone was to say, well, we think you have something here, it would be like, okay, give me studio time. I'll show up. I'll make it. And I even have in my mind the musicians that I would use, to do that. But other than that, I'm going to make it on a little portable thing, do the best I can, and it's a gift. You know, when that day comes around and I start making things, I'll get your email and I'll send you stuff over email, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. Because I'm not looking to go in business I'd like to play a couple live shows before I died, but it's not a priority on my part. I just want to make some music. And I think basically because everybody thinks that you kind of like when you stop making music like that, you go away, you know? No, I've always been in my head. My head's always got a tune going. It's always got an idea going. And, you know, so the record I'm working on now is all about how we're willing to trade our personal freedoms for safety.
Mhm.
So there's a song called Save. And there's another song about I don't want to be the king of shit now. You were talking about that earlier. Like I look at things like, you go on the Grammy show and you're Metallica and you've got to share the stage with Lady Gaga, and I wouldn't do it. I'd be like, I don't particularly care for Lady Gaga. So if I have to do a duet to get my Grammy, keep your Grammy,
Mhm.
you know. Uh I just feel that all that crap is just more promotional shit. And it's the way they keep everything clustered together and make it seem like anything outside of that bubble is just shit. And it's not because I feel the bubble is the shit, you know. Keep it clean, keep it, whoa. I look at things like the Go-Go's and that kind of stuff, the Bangles. And I go, that's what, the 90s MTV always wanted. There are certain exceptions to that. Like I like the B-52s, because I think they're genuinely, and that's the way I feel about Prince too. Prince was just kind of doing Curtis Mayfield,
Mhm.
you know? And so he wasn't that far away from what he would have done on his own time. He wasn't really, but then the sadness there is that he wanted to go more mature. And as I said, he wanted to get down into the hips and the shoulders. And they were like, no, raspberry beret. And he's like, hey, I got a 5 o'clock shadow now. I can be doing some adult shit here. And they're like, I know, but then the kids won't like you know. And I felt bad. And I know the guy's got millions of good tunes somewhere in a vault in Minneapolis, but the record label's never going to let us hear that. And I don't know if you know anything about the story about the Black record or the Black album.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Love.
that he went to France and dropped his version of the record on the guy's desk that he knew was a bootleg pirate. Because Warner Brothers was like, you got to clean that up, man. Got to clean that up. The kids are going to be offended. The parents won't buy them in their records. But see, that's the problem. Is that when did what we talked about earlier, where we would go out and find that record and it meant a lot to us, you know? And it also meant something because we found it and our parents didn't know about it, you know? And you basically surrendered and allowed your parents to pay the cable bill. And then that determined what came into your house. And you just ate it with a spoon, You ate it up with a spoon. No, get the hell out of your parents' basement. Stop eating the Fruit Loops and go buy a fucking record, you know? I remember when I was like 13, I went to my friends uptown and I'm like, what's a good record? And they sold me a copy of Blind Faith with the Ginger Baker's daughter on the cover, the Jet,
Mhm.
the original cover that was banned.
Yeah, yeah.
I love that record, except for one cut. But, I love that record. But that's what you used to do. You used to go to the store and say, hey, what's cool? What's cool? I can remember buying the first Stooges record in a 99-cent cutout bin. And think about that. I
Mhm.
think John Cale lost his job over those records. And here we are 50 years later, where they're more important than anything else that was being done at that time on that label.
Yes.
Well, that was Elektra, right? They had
Electra,
they had good, you
Electra
know.
had the Stooges and the MC5 at that point.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
let's be honest, those records, the Stooges weren't a raging success in their original run at fucking all. You know, they really weren't.
No, no. But
They were
come
pop.
on. And
Yeah.
that's, like I said, we were talking earlier about confusion of sex. I'm like, if you're going to do a cover of I Want to Be Your Dog, then, it's such an excellent song. You don't want to do a cover unless you're going to do justice,
Right.
to it, unless you're going to improve on it, make it better. Um, I just thought it was sloppy, just sloppy. I call it wanky playing. Just because you're playing outside doesn't necessarily mean that it's innovative or experimental. Sometimes it just means you're a poor ass player. That's what it means, you know. So, uh, you know, it's like, yeah, well, I ain't never. I remember I can't remember what band it was. But they were like, we made this first record and we played like, really badly and people loved it. And I'm like, well, what's the deal here? Like, how do you follow that up?
Hmm.
Get even worse? I mean, yeah, yeah. It's like, how do you top yourself? you know, right? So I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say about those people. And like I said, I also don't want to. You get caught in that box. You get caught in that like where like, oh well, everybody this year is wearing baggy ass pants. And then I really think a lot of that is a trick from the labels themselves. Like, well, if everybody just listens to the Crosby, Stills and Nash forever, you know, so they kind of like the way your phone is built to go apart after a year. Like after a year, your phone is going to break apart. It's like they built the obsolescence into music, like where you're not going to want to be seen a year from now listening to this shit, are you?
Right.
Yeah, I think it's the obsolescence that's built right in. Like the one thing I always tried to do was not make things specific to a certain time period, address things on a general scale. Not Nixon is doing this right now, but injustices are being done, and they're not, to this year. They're not connected to this year. There's cruelty and humanity all the time. It's not specific to 1985. And it's like when you hear certain music and like they'll treat the sax a certain way, and you'll be like, you can pinpoint what year that was done.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you like Peter Gabriel to me is like that. It's like there's some stuff on his records that are amazing, but then there's some stuff on there that's dated. And a band I can't listen to now, who I still have a lot of respect for, is Talking Heads, but I can't listen to like Remain in Light. It's just to me, it's so dry and clinical. You know, like it's just it doesn't. You sort of pass that longevity of like it doesn't work anymore. You know, it might have sounded great in 1980, but it doesn't sound great in 2010, and it
Right.
doesn't sound great in 2020. And it becomes, I think one of the things that I'm not really like a big Jack White fan, but you can play his music with Eddie Cochran, and he's smart enough to realize that he's going to get a lot just keeping it basic and clean and not going all that great. And I've noticed like riding around sometimes and picking up at like FM or college radio stations that they'll play like Eddie Cochran, they'll play God, older stuff, and then follow his stuff up, and it just the transformation is like very smooth, which is really kind of good. But I really don't. I still think that the less you do, the better off you are. You know, keep things simple. And my own criticism of myself is sometimes I was always overworking things. Like especially lyrically, I'm always trying to be the smart guy. Like, oh, let me shove this down your throat. Let me see how many syllables I can put in one line, let me see how many, concepts I can cram in there, dropping all these names and stuff, and it's like, and I go, oh, shut up. So now my approach is a lot like simpler, but that's what I'm working on now is modern times. I have a song called Ophelia. I love that Waterhouse painting where she's in the water, and she's kind of sinking. And so I'm doing a song about like how, you take your hybrid car and you go to the mall and you get caught in the middle of a SWAT battle with the guy who's shooting up kids in the theater. You know, that's Ophelia in the modern age, you know,
Mm.
uh, that she's got all, what you're feeding your kids, what you're going to, you drop them off at school and you're worried about them getting shot up in the hallways of the school. That's kind of where I'm at now, you know, and like I said, safe. And that's like all about like you need a strong tree with a thick trunk and heavy branches, deep roots, and you need a strong man to keep your shit in line, you know. And that's how I feel about now. The only problem is I'm not getting it done fast enough because it's topical.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's how I feel about like, you need someone to keep your ass in fucking line because it seems that we have just made up all these excuses for bad behavior and we're continuing to make up more,
Hmm.
to justify all that stuff. And so that's kind of where I'm at now, what it is like to have kids and drop them off at the mall and hope when you go back, they're still there, you know. Uh, don't want to be the king of shit mountain because that's how I feel. I feel that like if you succeed in this society, then you got to wonder like, you know, like you're the king of shit mountain
Right.
because it's a mountain of shit. And so why would you want to be the king of something that is a mountain of shit? I'd rather be a buck private in a functioning platoon than to be the king of shit mountain. You know, and I have a bunch of other stuff. Like I said, I'm got 7 songs down now. I'm working on more. And but it's gonna be right now, the only thing I can do is I can take a direct signal and multi-track it, but I don't know how to apply effects yet. That's next week. I'll know how to put reverb on the instruments. But I personally am trying to get the initial signal to be as close as possible so that when I do add the effects, there's not going to be, I don't need to go, you know? I find that like Pro Tools, everybody goes, I can make 100 million tracks. And you go, no, no. It's like Picasso said, why will you limit your palette?
Hmm.
You stay on, you limit your palette, you stay on point and you don't, I think that's why people don't get a lot of shit done. And that's also why I think that although the promise of the computer and Pro Tools and all that stuff was this, you could just do whatever you want. And that's the problem because everybody thinks they can do whatever they want and therefore they never get anything done. So I'm still back at like where I hear the song in my head, I hear the parts in my head, and that's what I'm going to try to get. As simple and as pure and as direct as possible. You know, I don't need all that stuff. I don't need to do that. What's that Black Hole Sun? You know, like my favorite Soundgarden record is that Loud as Love.
Hmm.
It's almost like a live record, you know. And then but they have their labels going. You got to do that Beatles thing. You got to do that Beatles thing. You got to do that Sergeant Pepper record. Have you heard the Marky Smith Sergeant Pepper record?
No,
Yeah, he did like a whole copy of Sergeant Pepper.
that's got to be extraordinary.
Oh yeah, you know.
So are you
Let's see in the
or
sky what diamonds are. He literally does that kind of shit on there. He sings in his inimitable Marky Smith, style, but
yeah,
he's doing Beatle covers. You know, they
that's
were so great. I saw them at Maxwell's in '83. So
wow.
much fun. Yeah.
No matter who he had in that band, they were extraordinarily tight. Um,
Yeah, well, because he knew enough about like the tightness was the looseness, kind of like beef art, you know?
mm,
It's like the tightness was the looseness. But then, I saw used to be in Philly, the bands from England would come and they would play Philly first because they would rent their back line. And then they would use Philly to try out their back line,
mm,
see how they were doing. Then they would go to New York because then they'd meet the critics. The critics would be sitting in New York waiting for them. So I saw The Cure on a Tuesday night when it was raining. There were 7 people in the audience, their first tour. They were doing Boys Don't Cry,
mm.
and that first record, which I like the first 3 records by them. I don't like them when they got too psychedelic. I like Forest and
Oh yeah,
M. Those are great fucking records. You know,
absolutely.
clean, crisp, and just unique. You know, and I like the first one as well. But it was so amazing to be like sitting there, and then they were real preppy. They had the white starch shirt and the black pants. And they were just, doo-doo, 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 doo-doo. They were amazing. And I'm like going, there's only like 6 other people here. It's like a private show, you know. And yeah, that's like same with like Butthole Surfers. I saw them, I think, in '83 at CB's, and I went to that strictly on the name. I'm like anybody that could name their band that, they either got to be the worst band ever or the best band ever, you know. And yeah, that's when they had the bullhorn and Gibby had the shit in his hair.
Mhm.
They were setting everything on fire, and the what everybody thought was a brother and sister combo on drums, but they're not. They're not related or something. I don't know. But that was amazing. And that's I also came up in '76 to see Patti Smith with Television and John Cale at the Palladium.
Wow,
And then afterwards, we went down to CB's and saw the Shirts and the Tuck Darts.
wow,
And there were stickers on the wall, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers for their first record of that flying V, the cross flying V. So when I got back to Harrisburg, we looked it up in the Schwann catalog and ordered that. And that, in my opinion, is his best record. The first one, with American Girl, and
yeah,
yeah, yeah. It's a shame how like people come out and they put out the first record and the second record, and then by the third or the fourth, you're like, they're listening too much to the,
right.
all the bean counters and the bankers all around them that are giving them advice, and you just go, you started out so great. But they, again, like the Pro Tools, it's like, I have 48 tracks. I can make 150 tracks, and you go, yeah, but you need a bass, a drum, guitars, and voice, And if you want to make it, you need some backing vocals. That's all you need. You don't need 48 tracks, You don't need 48 tracks. And I think people get distracted and they think that that's going to, but I also think that's like kind of insecurity of like, like I like now when you go online and they go, you can get the sound that the Edge uses on this particular song, you know, and all you need is $80 to buy this foot pedal. And I'm like going, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to sound like the Edge, At some point in time, you got to find your own voice and then do that and quit hiding behind it. And they brought out that record, the movie Let It Be, and they had every fucking guitar that George Harrison ever played, And they're like, here's a Telecaster that he used on this song, and this song. And then here's a, here's a Stratocaster he used on this song, this song, this song. Here's a Gibson he used on this song, this song, this song. And I'm like going, and the things that like the foot pedals that give you a 1960s Marshall sound, and you can choose it with tube or without tube, or a solid state Marshall, or would you like a Fender Twin? And I'm like, I don't know. You know, I get an amplifier, play a guitar. You don't need all that crap. That's why I keep thinking about, like, if 6 million people own the digital interface that I have, that means that there's probably over 150 million of those interface units sold because people are doing online blogs and all the rest of that stuff. And I'm thinking, that's just way too many. They have got everybody convinced that, it's like your stardom is this iPod or iPad, this guitar or this foot pedal or this, that's what's keeping you from being the next big thing.
Right.
No, I don't know what to tell them. All I know is one day you wake up and you're walking down the street to get cigarettes, and someone says to you, "Hey, they wrote about you in the New York Times," and you go, "Oh, really?" And then they go, "Yes." And they say they said nice things about you, and then the person you talk to goes, "I hate you," because that's what happens. That day you wake up and they write about you in the newspapers, and everybody goes, they either love you or they hate you. They either have a demo for you or they just hate you. I had a guy following me around one time for 3 hours, yelling at me, saying, "You're nothing." Yeah. I'm like, yeah, yeah. And then also one time had a guy following me around for 3 hours telling me I was Iggy Pop.
Right.
And I'm like, "No, I'm not Iggy Pop." And they go, "You just don't want to tell me because you don't want me to know." And I was like, "No, I'm telling you I'm not Iggy Pop because I'm not Iggy Pop. And then I'd say, "First off, I'm 6'2", and Iggy is like what, 5'7", I think. So I'm like, "No, I'm not Iggy. No, you just don't want me to know." No, I'm not Iggy Pop. I guarantee you I'm not Iggy Pop. Sure you are. That's happened to me. And then every time I would have a friend, I'd be like, "Please, don't be in a band. Don't be in a band because I like you.
Ah!
And, and I'm afraid if you're in a band, I might not like your band.
Mm.
And it's like, I want to have a friend that doesn't play in a band, that doesn't have a demo, you know,
You
just a
know,
guy that I can hang out with, you know.
that is tough. I mean, look, most of my friends are musicians. I love them.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm sure I've given them something to check out where they're like, this sucks. How do I tell Joel? But sometimes, man, I get the, hey, what do you think of my new track? And it's like, please don't do this to me. I thought we were friends.
Yeah, because you don't want to, and I can't do that. I listen to someone else's stuff and I go, well, the bass needs to be a little turned up, and I don't know why I watched a girl who has a really good voice, and so she made a video, and her uncle's playing the guitar, but she's in the video trying to fake playing the guitar. And I'm like, my first question is, why?
Mhm.
Just just sing. What, you think that I'm going to have a greater feeling for your song because you're playing the guitar on the song when you're not playing the guitar on the song? You know, but that's just the way things are. So if you would ask that person, they'd be like, "Well, people like to see you actually play because you wrote the song, so they want to see you playing the guitar." No, it's a good song. You don't need to do that. In fact, you're hurting yourself because you're not really, it's apparent you're not playing what is coming out.
Right.
Your hands are not in sync with what the notes are. So, in a way, you're doing yourself a disservice. You know, just go and sing.
Right.
Just sing. Figure out something to do with your hands, stick them in your pockets if you have to, you know. But yeah, I'm always like, when I hear stuff, I go, well, you know what would make that better? You know, you know what would make that better? You know, just clarity, or whatever, I can't. And so like sometimes I'm like, no, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear it because I'm gonna want to fix it. That's what I do. I fix it. So I'm gonna fix it. But always with us, we were like, you played it like you were playing it live. That's what you were. And then when you went in the studio, you basically were playing live and you had the option of overdubbing guitars and I could put in more vocal parts,
Mm.
you know. But other than that, we didn't really want to go crazy. We weren't working on Day in the Life, you know, by the Beatles. We were doing stupid Rat Arm music. Stupid.
I wouldn't call
uh,
it stupid at all, my
huh?
friend. I wouldn't call it stupid at all, my friend.
Oh well, it's trust me. What is that thing they say? If you can see how the stuff is made in the kitchen,
Sausage is made. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, then you would have a different thought about it. We used to like to, because it was expensive to rehearse. We used to like to play and literally write the song live on on stage, and that's what we did a lot of times because, um, like Larry Face Down on the Dragonfly record, we I had a solo show at the kitchen, and so we just went, and I just sort of made it up as we went along, and that's what John and Dave would do. They'd just make their parts up and follow me, and then we'd have to go back and learn how, and then it was like you say crazy shit in there, it just would come out. But I always felt that like I wasn't editing it, that it was just coming, and so whatever came would come out of my mouth. And then they'd be like, well, that doesn't make sense, and then you go, you're going to change it? And I'd be like, no, because that's the way it came. That was the inspiration that came to me at that moment. Doesn't make sense, but it had to be that way. Like I don't want to change it. It's like some people say, oh, you wrote poetry when you were 16. Don't you want to go back and, now that you're 67, you want to like, fix it up? No, because I was 16. And I'm thinking there's probably a 16-year-old that would get more out of me reading it as a 16-year-old as a 16-year-old writing than to be reading it as a 16-year-old reading something that a 67-year-old corrected, you know,
Right, right.
puts the grammar straight, gets the word. And also, I think a lot of rock and roll are mistakes. What really catches you in, what you remember is someone going, like, or making a sigh or messing the word up,
Mhm.
or saying something in combination, just dumb stuff. And that's what your takeaway is, someone breathing in, and trying to give a good example of like where it's something that's quirky and odd and outside, but that's what you remember, out of the song.
Right.
You don't necessarily, huh?
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, it's like those are the magic moments. It's like we were listening today to oh God, Little Anthony and the Imperials, And it's like you remember that line in the, I don't want a hamburger mama, I just want to dance. And when I was a kid, and that line would come on and be like, I don't want a hamburger mama. And I'm like, that is so great. That is such a great line, you know? I don't want a hamburger, mama. I just want to dance. That was our thing. We wanted to make. Eventually, we were going to make a dance record. We wanted to make a dance record, but I would go back to like Junior Walker and the All Stars, or you know, Little Anthony Imperials, that kind of stuff. Kind of the line dances and
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
like that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it'd be. Not the disco shit, not the disco stuff. That stuff. And I like that sackety, yakety sax kind of stuff. Max is real good at that. You know, that's what I would do. If someone said to me, "Oh, I like your demos enough, I'll give you money to go to a real studio," I'd be like, "Max, I need money to fly Max in from Seattle." Although I play sax, you know, I could learn it, but it'd be easier to just let Max do it,
Yeah.
because
Since
then I'd have to drag him out on the road with. And that was the thing. I love working with him. It's like I like working with people. It does, they're not. It's not work. It's work, but you really enjoy the work. The work makes you happy.
right.
Like I have a problem. I have to solve it. What will make this work? And that's where John was. John was like that. Um, that he liked, getting elbows down in it, getting deep into it, just like making it work. Like I say, as an artist, I like to spit on it and lick it, bang it a few times until it becomes a piece of art. That's the fun. That's the fun of it. The fun of it is not like getting awards or going to red carpet ceremonies, or like, the fun is making it. The fun is doing it. The process. The process is the fun. And you have to find, the right people to put them in a room. You know, when we worked with Sardi, the whole thing was like we had this, like the Marx Brothers. They used to say when they would shoot Coconuts and all those movies, that the director would lock them in a cage between shoots, like, because otherwise he would never find them again. They would be not ready for the next shoot. They'd be like disappeared. So he would lock them in a cage to keep them in there. And our problem was always like to stop laughing to get something accomplished. And then the other thing we found out, you could scratch. If you talk to the master, you could put secret messages in the vinyl on your record.
Hmm.
So the Dragonfly and Stainless Steel have messages written between the label and where the grooves stop. They're
Uh-huh.
little secret messages. That was We look forward to that. You know, there's one, Borgia Rice Hole is one, and the other one is, uh, the difference between sex and prayer is trumpets. That's the other message. We're always wondering if people just have discovered them after all these years,
Hmm.
held them up in the light.
Well, that'll happen now. They'll watch this and grab their
Oh,
vinyl.
well, yeah. Well, yeah, look for that. Hey, kids, you kids at home, there are secret messages in the
Or
red or our one. Huh?
more accurately, hey kids, tell your dad there's a
Yeah,
message on that Rat At Rat R record he bought 30 years ago.
yeah, yeah. I guess the kids ain't buying it, you know. Someone said, I love when like I'll see a record online and they'll be like $100. You know, someone had a handmade demo, our first like 3-song demo, and they wanted $1,200 for it. And I'm like, I never made that much in my whole entire career. And the idea that somebody, can sell a cassette tape, I don't think they got 1,200 for it. I think they took less, but then they didn't put that up what that was. But they probably took a lot less, but the idea that someone could even make 800 or 700 off of it, and they put that in there, handmade by the band. If I'd known that, I'd like made hundreds of them years ago and then kept them somewhere, and I'd break them out now and I'd be like, hey, look, you don't have to pay 12, just give me five,
Yeah, well, I'll cut you a
That's
deal.
like, yeah, I'll cut you a deal. That's what our records now. It's like for the longest time, I actually stole our first record from my friend Ann Marlowe because I didn't have one. So she said, "What? Water my plants and feed my cats." This was like in the early '90s, and I'm like, "Oh, look, she has a copy of the first record." I'm like, "I'll just take it." It's my record. Yeah. I hope she's okay with it. I guess she'll know that now. I guess she'll know that now. And I have your Hammerside record. Ah, I kept you on here till 10. We've been on here for 3 hours.
That's okay, man. I've enjoyed every second of it. You
Well,
know,
because I'm just thinking you got a hell of an edit ahead of you. You know.
yeah, it'll be worth it, man. I'll tell you what. When you and I first crossed paths, like I said, it was a long time ago. It was
Uh-huh.
a good 16, 17 years ago. Every time I've seen you post, I haven't always agreed with what you've had to say, and you know that. And we've gone back and forth, which I
Yeah, well, I say things that the next day I regret saying, so I understand. You
well,
know.
I'll tell you what, I've always found your perspective on things very interesting. I've always looked forward to them. Um, I've looked forward to this chat for a long time, and I couldn't be happier that it finally took place, Victor. So thank you for giving me so much time for this conversation. I really
You
appreciate
are
it.
more than welcome. Like I said, no one ever asked me about anything. They just don't. And I often sometimes wonder if like uh that I'm that like unapproachable, or that people take me as like I quit and I don't want to be bothered, or you know but I don't know. But there is a part of me that doesn't really enjoy being a spectacle. you know I had a problem with that in the village because, like I said, I'd go out to get cigarettes and there were people either hated me or they liked me. And I felt the ones that liked me, sometimes I didn't feel they liked me for the right reasons. And I felt the same way about the people that hated me, that they had this kind of, you know, uh, perception. Like my friend Charlie said, oh, that like in the 80s, I was one of the most arrogant motherfuckers ever, you know? And I'm like, well, I don't know, I know I had opinions, and I tried to stick with them, but I also didn't like being, you know, screwed. I didn't like being fucked with, like we were playing with Sonic Youth. I used to think that they just kind of wanted us to be their opening act, you know? And I'm like, what do we have to gain by being your opening act? I got John, I got Sonda, I got, Dave was always a problem because Dave could never, he had a problem taking care of himself. And the only reason I wanted to have a little more success is that maybe Dave could take care of himself a little more. You know, there were times when uh, he couldn't work, and he actually stayed in Ray's basement, that coffee shop on Avenue A. There were times when he squatted. There were times when I squatted, and there were times when I was homeless. And the only reason I'd want that was to be able to provide some kind of stability, you know. Uh, Sonda was lucky enough to work freelance. She worked for Rolling Stone, and then she ended up working for Spy. Um, I did a lot of freelancing, but I would work for a couple of months and then get laid off for 6 months. And so I was always screaming. But Dave always had a lot of problems. Dave was working on a book, and I wish he could have hung around long enough to finish it. But he was compiling drummer jokes. That was his big thing. He was going to put out a book of all the drummer jokes. And like he had a whole bunch of them. And I remember two of them really well. Have you heard them before?
I don't know.
Okay, like what's the difference between a rock and roll drummer and a pizza?
I don't know. What is it?
Pizza feeds a family. Yeah, right. The
Same could
other
be
one
said
was,
for a journalist too, believe me.
huh?
Thing he'd be said, two difference between a pizza and a journalist, believe me.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, that was a great thing too. And then when you were a photographer, when you'd go to the shows and you'd be like, I want to be a photographer. I'll go and I'll take pictures. I'll take pictures of Killing Joke, and then I'll get them published in a like a local magazine. My friend Steve, he did Terminal, and the people he had writing for him was Michael Stipe, Al Jurgensen,
Hmm.
Exena, John Doe, the Alvin brothers or the Irwin brothers from the Blasters.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And they were all writing for him. And Jello, all these people were writing for him. But he ended up, going bankrupt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
He owed everybody money. But he had amazing people writing for him at that time. And all those people went on to become
Hmm.
quite known. Stipe, and I see Exene is playing, X is playing now.
Yeah, yeah.
They were a good band. They were good. I
Yeah.
like their harmonies.
It's
John Doe and Exene, their voices blend really well.
it's funny with X. I like the later period X. Like Jesus, I think is an amazing record. No one
I'll have
gives
to
a
check that
shit
out.
about that record. They like the old punk stuff, and I am so done with the first couple of X records. Like I've seen I lived in LA and they played like it seemed like every other day out there, which is cool.
Oh,
But I got so bored with the like them doing the old stuff. I'm like, play some like
some of the newer stuff.
punk
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, play some newer stuff. It's as good as the classic stuff. But some of those bands, they know where their bread is buttered. Obviously, they got to go play the hits.
2006, when John was talking about like rejoining or like going out and touring and stuff, and he said to me at one point, "Are you ready to parody yourself?"
Mm.
And I'm like, I don't know. You know, see, the thing is you don't get to see yourself. You don't get to see yourself. Wow, like people go, "Oh, you guys are really good," and it's like, "Oh shit, I wish I could sit out in the audience." And it's not the same to see a video. You know, it's not the same. It's just not the same. It's like when you go and you stand up in the front and you're watching like I don't know, Bad Brains or the Ramones or anybody for that matter. It's a lot different. I remember when I saw John Cale in Philadelphia. I got right up against him, and he comes out and they were doing Ready for War, and he's got the helmet on, and he's like, and I'm like, I can't stand next to him. I had to move back 6 feet. And I'm like, I can't, you know, it's just not the same as when you're there. And so I have no idea. But he's like, can you parody yourself? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Tell me what I'm like. Can you mime it? Can you show me, like how to do it? I said, I'm just going to go out and be myself. How do I parody myself? So you got to worry about that too. It's like, what's that, Barton Fink, like, bring me Barton Fink, bring me Barton Fink you know? Who's Barton
Hey,
Fink?
turns up on my channel. Unbelievable.
Huh?
I said,
What?
there's a Barton Fink mention on my channel now. I love it. I love it.
Why? Have you
Just
been waiting for that?
I just love where these conversations go because I have kind of a rough idea of where things
Mm-hmm.
may go, but and I do this channel for the moments.
Oh,
That's
yeah?
when the interview
I,
goes.
I live for those moments. I live for synchronicity and all that stuff. Yeah, I love that stuff. Yeah.
Oh, what's the second drummer joke? You told me the pizza one. You said there was a second one.
Yes. What do you call a drummer without a girlfriend?
Homeless.
There you go. You
Yeah,
know that. You
yeah.
know that. Yeah.
Not from
Yeah. But he,
personal experience, even though I am a drummer. I've never been homeless.
well, you must be good.
Well, I
Not
I do
maybe
other
not
shit for money.
necessarily as a drummer, but you must be good at something, you know.
So far, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or in 6 months, let's say, or 5 months, but you know,
Well, again, I've been like had relationships that lasted 8 years and then they turn out ugly, and I've had them that lasted 15 years and they turn out ugly. And yeah, I there's a couple regrets that I have, but unfortunately, at the time that I made those mistakes, I was so young that I get some leeway on it. But yeah, yeah, there are definitely things that I regret. But you know what it's like. Youth is wasted on the young. What's that expression?
yeah, that's it. Youth is wasting on the young.
Yeah, because it's like, now that I'm older and you're older, you know better. But getting there, no one can tell you.
Yep, yep. Oh,
No one can tell you.
I
That's not a good idea.
I
That's
see
not a
it
good idea.
now. I,
Huh?
I see it now with my stepson. He's 23. He's the same age I was when I started my career.
Uh-huh.
And I'm looking at him and I know, like, it's like when you're watching a horror movie and the young girl runs to the abandoned house and
Yeah.
they're like, don't open the door. I'm having those don't open the door moments with my
Yeah,
kid.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
But you know what? The reality is, all I can do is stand by the side and watch him go in that building because that's
Right.
what it's meant to do. You can't prevent people from making the mistakes they need to make in order to know
You,
not to do them.
you need to make those mistakes to learn. I was reading online the other day. Someone posted something saying that it's a myth that you don't learn from your mistakes.
Mhm.
And I'm like, what are they doing? Are they trying to sell AI? Is that their approach? Is that going to be their approach to AI? That you can't learn anything by making mistakes on your own. So just throw your towel in and just whatever AI tells you, accept it. I think that's where it's going. I think that's what they really want. Is to have something like that, because how else could you how else could you say something like that? But again, I don't get a lot of what's going on the internet, and just like, because we have this particular system, it's like a ticket to lie. Stuff that is obviously an outright fallacy.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's exists on there, and they accept it, and you go, well, how can that be? How can you do that? Like, where did, like, common sense take a nap? Like, just leave the country for a while. Like, and like the global warming, it's like, it just makes sense. Like, but to argue about, oh no, it doesn't exist, and oh, it really exists, and like I said, the center has just disappeared. You know, because I just go, why do you, if even if there's all the oil in the world and it's unlimited, why would you want to keep using it? You know what I mean? Like, why would you want to? Why wouldn't you want to? I don't know what's going on. Maybe the Earth is just kind of ready to do what it does. Maybe it's just time for the Earth to change. It doesn't give a shit about us any more than we give a shit about ants on the pavement when we walk down the street. I know what people think, that, like, the Earth itself has like a consciousness and it's going, well, I don't want to hurt nobody. you know, it's just like it's just like us. It's like, I'm gonna hope to get around the sun again a second time, and another time, keep on doing it. And that's really where my head is at. I hope I don't like fly into the sun or wreck into the moon or hit Mars accidentally, you know. So no, it's not worried about whatever the hell's going on us. And but I also have a problem. Like I don't think there was one guy and then he left Africa and went everywhere. I think people came out of the water all over the goddamn place, and that's why there are different races and different, you know, kinds of things. It's like people climbing out in the Philippines, you know, and people climbing out in South America and people climbing out in China, you know. But I also feel that the dolphins are the smartest humans on the planet because they don't build nothing. And when the water gets too hot or too cold, they just swim over there. We're the stupid assholes that build shit and then get upset when the wind blows. Like, then you go like, oh well, look, you know, there's people in the Caribbean. They built shit out of grass. You know, they build little huts out of grass. Look at how stupid they are. And then they go, yeah, because next year the hurricane comes, blows their hut down, and they just run around, pick it back up, and put it back together. You know, I mean, like, who's a stupid asshole? You know, when you see these people now where their houses are going off the cliff down into the river,
Oh yeah. Mhm.
and you know, it's like you go, I don't know. I think dolphins are pretty fucking smart. I also figured out had a theory called stoner dolphin, where the dolphins go out, like they go to New York and they get some coke and they get some heroin. Then they get down to Philly and they pick up some crystal meth. Then they get wired and they swim over to Seattle and they go into the Puget Sound there and they get some Ritalin. That calms them down a little bit. So they have it all made, you know, they have it all figured out. Stoner dolphin. That's what. It's another one of my songs.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we've got
Stoner dolphin.
whoa,
I have a T-shirt of that. But
you really?
mhm. Yeah, that I made that up a long time ago. Also, when Max and I were first doing we call our thing suffer robot because you know it just makes me laugh. Used to have this friend who like he would go suffer robot, and so but we wanted to release a CD that when you opened it up, it had it you got like perfume would hit you. So you would
Mhm.
open up the CD and the perfume would like spray you. It was called Joy. Yeah, we wanted to market our own perfume.
That's awesome.
No, he's Joe. That's what it was. Joe for men. We had that all worked out too, but he's out there doing what he's doing in LA
Yeah.
or in Seattle. My friend, there's a band called Sakara, and they're doing a Portland, San Francisco tour. So my friend wants me to ride out with him in October, and then he wants to drop me off in Portland so I could do some recording with Max, you know. And I'll tell you what I really want to do. Have you ever heard Plastic Fantastic by the Jefferson Airplane? Like early?
I think so.
You probably have.
Yeah.
It's got great bass line. Jack Cassidy,
Yeah, yeah.
amazing, amazing. Him and Jorma were amazing. It's so sad, you know, because like then they morphed into that Jefferson Starship. And again, that's a prime example. But early Jefferson's Airplane was amazing. That stuff was amazing.
Jorma's phenomenal. I saw him live a few years back.
They were amazing players, and the harmony was so good. I mean, that's what I think. What I like about X is the way Exene and John Doe's their voices blend.
Yeah.
I've as I've gotten older, I have gotten more into that. Like I really appreciate that. You know, when of course, I'm a big Joni Mitchell fan, and
Mm.
no one does that stuff better than her. Yeah, those are my secret things. I'm a big Kate Bush fan, super Joni Mitchell fan, and the other people I like are PJ Harvey and Patti Smith, of course.
Mm.
You know, I love PJ Harvey. I have
Yeah.
a big crush on her. What a talent, you know. And again, she's another one that you don't need all that crap. She's very minimal. You know, she just blows me away. I
Yeah,
keep wondering how big she is. I wonder how tall she is.
that I don't know, but I saw a clip of her. It was just her and an electric guitar. She's playing some massive festival,
Uh-huh.
and she's doing "Rid of Me," the song "Rid of Me."
Uh-huh.
And I don't know how many tens of thousands of people were out there, but it's just her. And she looked, especially because it was just her on stage, she looked tiny, you know.
Yeah.
Here's this, relatively, um, I guess we'll call her a smaller lady. I don't know how tall she, I've never been next to her, but on the
Well,
stage,
5'5", 5'6", something like that, maybe, you
but
know?
she held that entire crowd in the palm of her hand, and she's going for it with just a guitar.
Yeah.
The real thing will always be felt. I've always believed that. The real
Oh,
thing,
yeah.
you know it when you see it and when you hear it. And that woman is a real thing.
Well, like art. Art's like that. It's like you can go to 99 art shows, and then the 100th, it's like you know art when you see it,
Yeah.
but you will allow yourself to sort of, just go, okay, all right, okay, you know. But it's like one of those things. You'll go to the art show and you go, yeah, I enjoy this person's technique and their work, and they have their skills together now, But then every once in a while, you just come around that corner and go, what?
Yep.
Like, where did this shit come from? And then you go, yeah, I could, yes. All of a sudden, what you looked at last week doesn't quite appear to meet that standard. And you just kind of like go, okay. And that's where that kind of is. Like you see 100 Bangles and the Go-Go's and all that. And then you see PJ Harvey and you go, yeah. Or like Patty, a lot of people didn't, like she couldn't sing, you know. And when people say that Dylan can't sing, I want them to listen to Isis off of Desire. I don't know if you ever heard that or not,
I don't
but
know if I
yeah, that's a great song. I'm going to do cover up because it's like you can hear that he knows what the fuck he's doing,
yeah.
you know. And again, that's someone that like he just didn't write a couple good songs. He wrote good songs over and over and over again. One of my favorite records is Blood on the Tracks.
Mm.
If you haven't heard that, listen to that or listen to Isis. I want to learn how to do stuff a cappella, so that if I ever get to New York City, I'm just going to show up at open mics and just rip. Because I love doing that, you know. I used to chase people around at the readings at Life Cafe. I used to chase them around with a folding chair, you know, snapping it while I read. You know. Of course, I didn't want to read off the paper. Reading is not a really good name for it. I have read off the paper. Usually, just go and wing it.
Mm.
Just kind of make shit up and hope you could, because that's the fun. Like you go and you stand in front of a bunch of people, and then you go, okay, I'm supposed to be like some kind of performance poet guy. So now I have to come up with something. And that's your ass tightens up, and then you go, I could make a complete fool out of myself. So yeah, that's what it is. You scare yourself into that. You go
Well,
like, oh, I'm here. I better do something.
Victor, it's been a real pleasure. Seriously, let's do this again sometime.
I'm a bore.
Oh, you're not. We can do an entire series just you and me talking.
But there's all the stuff that I've left out, all the good stuff, all the juicy shit. We
All the
we
good
didn't
stuff.
even, huh?
That's why we have to do a part two because we haven't even talked shit yet. So you got to come
Yeah,
back.
that's true. Because like I said, I go down the rabbit hole and I don't come back. And then there's no non sequiturs. Well, let me know. I've had a lot of fun. You know,
Too.
uh, I still don't know why anybody would be interested, but I hope someone is.
Oh, I'm sure.
And